Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, in this really beautiful location here to the event Science Diplomacy, Scientific Collaboration and Realpolitik, which is organized by Euroscience, the European Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology, and the Senate of the Czech Republic. Thank you very much. My name is Matthias Giraud. I am the moderator for today of one panel, and for everyone who does not know Euroscience, we are a European association based in Strasbourg of individual researchers. And what we are working, it's already in our name, we are working on improving science practice, the way science is performed. And in the framework of our work here, we wanted to look today a little bit more on science diplomacy. Where do we stand? What can it do? And what is the way forward? We have two panels with very interesting people. And without further ado, I would like to thank Jiří Dráž, and I would like to ask him to say some opening words. Jiří, floor is yours.
I will speak in Czech.
Já budu hovořit. I'm going to speak in Czech. So, dear friends, dear minister, dear colleagues.
In online version. Dovolte mi tedy přivítat vás všechny.
So once again, let me welcome you to the Czech Senate at a conference under the auspices of the Czech presidency in the Council of the EU. And we will focus on a very important topic of scientific diplomacy and its role in today's world. But first, just a small historical digression. 4 years ago, I wrote a foreword to the Czech translation of a very interesting book by Professor Ruffini entitled Science and Diplomacy. And at that time, it was the first publication on our book market that systematically dealt with the links between science and diplomacy, and especially the dimension of international relations, where new findings from research and development are intertwined with the foreign policy interests of individual states. The book is available in the Czech language in bookstores, so I can definitely recommend that. It relates to the topic of this conference. So what I took away from that book was an understanding of science diplomacy as a full-fledged component of diplomatic activities that has long been used by world and regional powers. So it's about completing an attractive image of a country abroad with an emphasis on high standards of science, innovations, and higher education, university education. So science diplomacy is not limited to relations between individual states only, but it also plays an important role at multilateral level in tackling global challenges, such as climate change, space research, or the establishment and operation of very expensive international research infrastructures, such as the famous particle accelerator at CERN in Geneva, or the ITER thermonuclear experimental reactor in southern France. And of course, ELI and beamlines in nearby Dolní Břežany. So science diplomacy is undoubtedly an important form of diplomacy of influence. That is a field that's currently on the rise. The diplomacy of influence, that's relatively new, but there are many examples in the past documenting the interaction between science and diplomacy, such as exploratory naval voyages in past centuries. So, however, it's only since the end of the Cold War that we can speak of science diplomacy as a distinct and generally recognized field with its own name. But science diplomacy is not the preserve of the large developed economies only. For example, like Switzerland, they have some 20 scientific advisors abroad. In our country, the concept of scientific diplomacy has only recently emerged after we appointed our first science attachés in Israel, United States, and Taiwan. And their main task is to deepen relations and establish partnerships with key scientific institutions, representing the Czech science at professional fora, supporting the mobility of scientists, and connecting Czech research teams with foreign companies. In some other countries, such as Taiwan, science diplomacy can help our economic diplomacy by cooperation projects in the field of advanced technologies with high added value. So I saw it myself that such cooperation can work very well when I visited Taiwan in September this year. So, ladies and gentlemen, the war in Ukraine has greatly affected the whole diplomatic world, and the field of scientific diplomacy was no exception. The Czech Republic, just as its state and non-state institutions, found itself in a situation in which it has been trying to help the hard-pressed Ukraine in all possible ways. So I think I can say that when it comes to scientific cooperation, contacts are very intense, be it between relevant ministries, universities, or even local governments. I should also not overlook the crucial role played by the Czech Academy of Sciences in the Czech environment. And I'm also happy that we will be addressing the topic of Ukraine in the second half of our conference. So let me thank all the speakers who accepted our invitation, and also my colleagues from European Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology, that is Euroscience, for the organization of this conference. So thank you, and have a nice day.
Kind words. Since this is an event under on the official of the Czech presidency, we also invited a member of the Czech government, and we are very happy that she followed our invitation. So I would like to give now to the floor to Ms. Helena Langstadt-Lova, the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. The floor is yours.
Já se omlouvám.
So the first Vice President of the Senate, I'm really happy that I can speak here at an introduction of this conference. When it comes to scientific diplomacy in the times that we live in, I think that such discussions come really in time, because science diplomacy is a part of research and development. It's an integral part of that. And it is absolutely necessary to support internalization, to support cooperation across countries. But it's also an integral part of foreign policy. We don't live in easy times. Some crises have already been mentioned, and there is no existing national solution to all these challenges. Speaking about climate change, speaking about the security challenges, the energy crisis, and all the other challenges that we face in Europe at this moment, healthcare, aging of the population, but also protecting our democratic values. All of that is in front of us on the table, and we have to solve it all together. We often hear about strategic autonomy, and we talk about it in Europe, but I believe that we should be cooperating with all developed democratic countries, countries that share our values of democracy and freedom. And you wouldn't find even one topic that cannot be solved together with the scientists and would be possible to be solved without our scientists and outcomes of their work. So that's why at this moment, scientific diplomacy plays even more important role than in the past. Of course, we are limited in our resources. You heard about our 3 scientific diplomats that we have at our embassies. We have an excellent scientific diplomat in Israel. I visited Israel in recent months, and they've done a lot of work. We also, well, that scientific diplomat is an excellent example. It's a madam. And I believe that we will have a scientific diplomat in Washington soon, and also we have one in Taipei. I visited Taiwan, and my visit to Taiwan also focused on science and innovations. We also have some 20 diplomats ready to go to their destinations and work as scientific diplomats. And I think that we should use their potential more. I've already started. I talked to these people. I gave them some tasks to work on. I also cooperate with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on that issue. And it's important that also people in various research institutions and organizations know about these individuals. As I said, we should be solving the big challenges across countries, but there are also other challenges, and I'm looking at our colleagues from the German embassy, that we're dealing with on the European level. Of course, yes, once we joined the EU, a huge space, a huge sphere had been opened to our scientists, and a lot is at their disposal through various operational programs and projects within the programs in the EU, but also there are various calls for projects, for example, under Horizon Europe, and scientists can submit their applications. And you know that in the second and the third pillar in particular, the scientists have to apply in consortia. So I can see a huge potential which hasn't been used to its full, and our scientists should be more active, and our scientific diplomats should be more active as well. They should try to search for contacts actively and interconnect our scientific work sites with foreign work sites, so that we're even more active in Horizon Europe. The Euro Commissioner, Mrs. Gabriel, mentions it quite often, that the new member states that joined the EU at 2004 haven't been as active as they could be. So the scientific diplomacy could do a lot of work in that respect. And I hope that we'll manage to increase the participation of our scientists in various programs of that kind. But there are also new challenges that we're facing and that cannot be solved on the local level, such as various ethical issues, ethical questions. Yesterday, I participated in a discussion at the US Embassy. It was about quantum computers, artificial intelligence, and there are many ethical issues related to it. And you cannot solve it on the national level. You have to cooperate with partners from European countries and other global developed and democratic countries. So there are many challenges in front of us, and I firmly believe that this conference will be one of those events that would contribute to better solving these challenges. Now, I have to apologize to all of you because by coincidence, the Assembly of the Academy of Sciences is in session, so I will have to leave this conference. But I wish you all the success and have an interesting discussion at this conference.
Very much, and thank you for taking the time to come here to hear the opening words. Well, I think it's now time to start for the first panel. And as we have heard from the two opening statements, the stakes for science diplomacy is quite high. So this first panel should really look at the strengths, the limitations, the role of science in international collaboration, in international diplomacy. And I have four experts on the field representing various stakeholders in science and science diplomacy and in international diplomacy. And well, I think I will just immediately start. The first speaker on this panel is Maria Cristina Russo. She is the Director for International Collaboration and Global Approach in Research and Innovation. She is working at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, and she is also responsible for the development and implementation of the the EU science diplomacy agenda, which is a new thing, I guess, and it's currently under development. And this is why I would like to ask Ms. Russo in the beginning, so where do we stand? Why does Europe do this now? And yeah, to tell us a little bit more about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias, and good morning to everybody. Let me thank, first of all, the Vice President Rahos for hosting us today in this wonderful building. And by the way, I'm very happy that I made it. It was a bit difficult yesterday to reach Prague, but I'm happy to be here with you. Let me thank also Euroscience and especially the President, Mr. Michael Martlotz, for having this event here. And let me say also that I was very much inspired by the words of the Czech minister, especially the fact that she underlined so much how international cooperation and science diplomacy are really an important part, a building block, I should say, of the external policy. And that is the work that we are doing in the European Commission, in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation, and in the Directorate for International Cooperation and Global Approach, which I have the honor to lead. In this respect, I think that we are now accelerating the work on science diplomacy. This is true, with the ambition of having a science diplomacy agenda, which is developed with the member states, the European Union institutions and the member states. But let me also say that we are not starting to work on that now. I think it's important for me to say. I think it's important picking up the words that the minister said to remind that the European research and innovation programs, now Horizon Europe, before Horizon 2020, and the different framework programs have been progressively open to participation of research organizations from all over the world. And since Horizon 2020, which was launched in 2013, we have the full openness of the EU research and innovation programs to the participation of researchers from outside the world. And before the adoption of the Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020 program, we had a communication which was adopted in 2012 of the European Commission, which for the first time put science diplomacy as one of the pillars of the actions that need to be then developed through the framework program. But I would like also to make a step backwards by recalling the fact that we have more than 20 science and technology agreements, bilateral agreements between the European Union and key third countries outside Europe. The first one was with Australia, I think now around 25 years ago. Then we have followed with several agreements with the US, with South Africa, Israel was mentioned, and many others. And I think that these agreements, which have been concluded in the moment where the EU program was not open yet, were already the embryo of the science diplomacy, of the work that we were doing in order to really use our science cooperation to build stronger ties with the partners outside Europe, with partner countries, not only to pull together scientists in order to have a better research, to tackle together the global societal challenges, but also to use science as a supporting of the relations that the EU wanted to have with some key third countries. While I was listening here to the interventions and while we were working to the Senate, I was remembering many years ago, more than 20 years ago, when I was working with then Commissioner Philippe Busquin, Commissioner for Research and Innovation. And for example, I remember when we went to Chile to have this, and he signed the EU-Chile Science and Technology Agreement with the new government, which was in fact also a sign of support that the European Commission wanted to give to this new government, and the fact that science was one of the pillar of this new relationship that we wanted to have. Now, I spoke a lot about the past, and of course, what I'm here to say is why now and why are we accelerating the work on science diplomacy? Why now? I think there is no need to say how the international situation, the evolutions that we have seen in the world really demand for pulling all the tools that we have in order to be able to have more impact at global level, in order to be stronger in our action. I mean, of course, I am referring not only, but in particular to the Russian aggression to Ukraine, which really was a shock for many of us, of course, and still is. And we were, in this case, for example, very, I'm happy is not a right word when we're speaking about war, but happy to have the tools to react to this aggression in terms of research and innovation, to have the tools because we had adopted the EU new approach to international cooperation, the global approach, which is our new strategy adopted in 2021, which, if you want, replaces the one that was adopted in 2012, which I mentioned earlier on. And there, I think it's important to say that the science diplomacy, it's at the core of the strategy, and also to say that the bulk of this new strategy of the global approach is that we want to use research and innovation as a mean also to promote our values and principles in international cooperation. And that was very important to have the right policy background when we had to react to the Russian aggression in Ukraine. I know this will be discussed in the next session, so I will not develop here, but we've been very, quick in taking the measures in order to stop any kind of cooperation with the Russian Federation public bodies and also to support the Ukrainian researchers. But let me say that with this communication on the global approach, so we put science diplomacy high on the agenda again. We confirm its importance. As the minister said, we had several projects under Horizon 2020 which developed the science diplomacy activities. And within the result of those projects, we have established an EU Science Diplomacy Alliance, which has the ambition of gathering the most important academic players in the field. And with the communication on the global approach, we took stock of this work, which was very much listened to by the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers. And the Parliament has adopted a resolution endorsing the global approach, highlighting the importance of science diplomacy. And the Council of Ministers went even further. The Council adopted in September 2021 a set of conclusions on the global approach. And with this conclusion, the Council calls upon the Commission and the European External Action Service, which is let's say the EU Ministry for Foreign Affairs, to develop a science diplomacy agenda. We are now working in this direction. We have set up a steering team which consists of Commission staffs in the EU delegations. And let me open a parenthesis here. We also have a network of science counselors in the EU delegations. We have around 10 of them in the most important delegations, let's say, in terms of in international cooperation in research and innovation, for example, in the US, in Canada, in Japan, in Beijing, in Moscow. I will not list all of them. In Israel, Israel was mentioned. And I think that one of the key points is that would be that the representatives of the EU Research and Innovation Directorate in the delegation should also further strengthen the activities that they are already undertaking in order to have stronger networks with the member states representatives. But I will not advance what will be in this agenda. That we are developing, again, with the Commission colleagues, with the staff in the delegations, with the European External Action Service, and also with Member States representatives, both from the Ministry of Research and from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I'm very happy to see here Peter Kaiser, who is the Czech envoy for science diplomacy, who is participating in this steering team that we have. I will not advance further what we will have in the science diplomacy agenda. I'm here also to listen to what is said, that it's important to be there. But what I would like to say is that in the first semester of next year, we will adopt a first report on the implementation of the global approach. And within this first report, we will develop our ideas for a European science diplomacy agenda. We will then discuss them with our member states, and we already had informally the commitment of the forthcoming Spanish presidency of the Council of the Ministers of the EU to organize a ministerial debate on science diplomacy. And then we will move forward with this agenda, which for us, should aim at setting clearly the geopolitical context, highlighting the importance and the role of science diplomacy, and also highlighting some key actions that we at EU level and with the member states should agree upon in order to have more impact in our external activities. I think I stop here for now, and I would be willing to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Just a very quick follow-up question. You were saying it's a process endorsed by the Council and also a co-creation process with the member states. How is that working? I mean, I can imagine that about 27 member states, there are quite some differences, quite some different approaches. How is the process going?
Let's say that we have put in place the tools for the process to be moving in the right direction. First of all, as it was mentioned, and as it is also in the Czech Republic, in several member states, we have science counselors or science diplomacy attaché, and they are working with us. We are also working with the member states throughout the Global Approach subgroup of the European Research Area Forum that was set last year. And so we do have a buy-in of the different member states. But let me say that the situation is a bit more complicated for the fact that we need the member states both from the research side and from the foreign affairs side. So this is more challenging because in terms of research and innovation, we have a good network which is working. What is challenging and why it's important also this discussion here is to have this link between the networks in the field of research, innovation, and foreign affairs. And that's the work that we still want to do. And let me just highlight that for me, it's important that any science diplomacy project issued, proposed, needs really to be to have the buy-in both from the research stakeholder community and the foreign affairs ones. And I hope that this discussion will help progressing in that direction.
Thank you very much. Okay, since we were already at the member states, I would go on to my next panelist. It's Dr. Landry Chaillet. He is a French national, currently working in Germany, and he was, in his career, attaché for academic collaboration at the French embassy in Germany, and later on, attaché for scientific and academic collaboration in the embassy of France to the Netherlands. So thank you very much for being with us, and we hope that you were getting from you a little bit the perspective of the member states. So can you please very quickly explain what is the job, or what was your job as a scientific attaché, and how much were you involved in the international collaboration and the diplomacy effort? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthias, for having me today here and for giving me the opportunity to reflect on my praxis as an attaché for scientific cooperation. I started to work for the French Cultural Network, for the French Embassy, right after the election of Emmanuel Macron. And as everybody knows, it was a time marked by high expectations, but also, as our colleague just said, by growing challenges worldwide. In Bonn and in the region I was in charge of, 5 Bundesländer, I had the privilege to evolve in a very friendly ecosystem. And it was the same situation for me in The Hague. In both countries, I could rely on trustful partners to foster bilateral scientific cooperation and at the same time to push the French European agenda. The narrative developed by our ministry by the foreign ministry, was until 2019 not that different from the way we've considered our science diplomacy policy since 2013, the year Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius launched the concept of influential power. But 2019 marked a shift. From that moment on, France tried to position science diplomacy at a new level, not only as an instrument to build bridges, not only as an instrument to foster scientific cooperation, to attract talents, to increase international mobility, to tackle global or societal challenges, but also as a weapon. The idea developed by our Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian in the Roadmap of Influence released in 2019 was the following, and I will put myself in the shoes of our former minister, if you allow. In a world driven by competition and growing brutalization, national security policy and foreign science policy must be more closely interlinked. Science diplomacy has a strategic function of prime importance. It is a central pillar of France's ability to act at the international level. Its role consists, and it was a narrative developed by our minister and developed in this famous roadmap of influence. The role of science diplomacy consists not only in seducing, not only in attracting, but also in winning battles, in gaining new positions and allies, especially in regions such as the Sub-Sahara or the Indo-Pacific. The expression Jean-Yves Le Drian used a bit later in the context of the Ambassadors' Conference is, in my view, representative of this evolution of this much more assertive policy France wants to develop in the field of influence. I quote Jean-Yves Le Drian, "There is no more soft power, there is only hard power." This new awareness had direct consequences on the way we had to work and on the way we had to implement our projects. We were asked to use the full range of tools at our disposal: diplomatic, economic, political, legal, and cultural. We were also asked to work as close as possible with all the other sections of our embassy. And in terms of communication, we were finally asked to present ourselves as not only as a scientific attaché, but as a member of a bigger team, the Team France. But I have to admit, lots of my colleagues were struggling with this new approach because they were not prepared for it, but also because they were not willing to work with colleagues from other ministries, even if they were located under the same roof. I can remember a project on Chinese interference. A project I wanted to launch with a very important partner of mine in The Hague, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. My goal was to set up a discussion gathering researchers from the Netherlands and representatives from the French ministries of Defense and Foreign Affairs, and by doing so to foster the Franco-Dutch cooperation in this very sensitive field. The project was, from my point of view, totally in line with the recommendation given by our foreign minister. However, it was brought to my attention that this was not my job to engage in this field, but the job of the political department. Another important step has been taken right at the end of my time in The Hague, namely the Europeanization of our approach to science diplomacy. For France, Europe has always been a lever that has allowed the country to play a certain role at the international level. Europe has always been, or has always seen, as a tool to help France to project its global ambitions. In the context of the war in Ukraine, France is more and more pushing now to carry out European diplomacy of influence as part of an increasing level of strategic autonomy. I think this evolution is mainly driven by the fact that France realized it does not have the means to act alone in a world that is getting more and more complex and that is getting more and more dangerous. I'm really curious to see how the national strategy of influence that Emmanuel Macron announced on the 9th of November 2022 in Toulon will translate this new orientation, and whether it will be compatible with the European science diplomacy agenda that is currently under development. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Landry. Just a follow-up question here, because what I didn't say now when I introduced you is that you meanwhile changed jobs. So you are currently working as an advisor on science diplomacy and international relations at the German Aerospace Agency at the Project Management Office. And I'm taking advantage because you are a part of of one of the major agencies that is also by definition international because it's about space. So how do you see, I mean, we were talking a lot about ministries, about embassies for now. How do you see the role of, for example, these large-scale research agencies in the science diplomacy process?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Let me say some words about the work we are doing at the PT in Bonn. We are at the PT deeply convinced that science diplomacy can play a key role in solving global challenges and in contributing to confidence building, in drawing attention to the threats of to the fundamental principles of international cooperation. Our main goal at the PT is to develop spaces. That's a key word in the way we want to work on this topic. We want to develop spaces for co-creation and to encourage a common understanding of the opportunities and challenges of science diplomacy. Where is the point of balance where the interests of science and diplomacy converge. This is one of the most important questions we strive to answer. And to answer it, we have developed a quite wide portfolio. First, we offer targeted training to sensitize the actors involved in science diplomacy, among others via our Science Diplomacy Academy that has been launched in 2021. Secondly, the DLR also launched a European Union Science Diplomacy Alliance. You mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, in March 2021 with partners from all over Europe. And this alliance is still attracting new partners, aims at facilitating interactions and dialogue, training, institutional capacity building and coordination of grant seeking. The alliance serves as a hub for cooperative activities and voluntary coordination. And it is hoped that a great variety of societal challenges may be addressed over time. And thirdly, in the framework of the series developed by our Brussels office, the so-called Brussels Future Talk, we strive to promote the exchange of experts from politics, from science, and from diplomacy. And the next episode of our series will take place on the 26th of January in Brussels and will be dedicated to science diplomacy from data to policy implementation.
Thank you very much. Okay, now from these sides, I would come to a third stakeholder, and my third panelist is Přemysl Pejla. He is the head of the Czech Center in London, and before that, he held similar positions at the Czech Center in New York, and also, as far as I know, as the HQ here in Prague. And I would like to ask him, what is the Czech Center actually doing, and what is the mission of it?
Thank you. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Vice President, for hosting this conference here. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I spare describing the journey flying from London to Prague over 10 hours, which would be a different topic. But what I thought I'll offer more kind of practitioner's view on the science, the diplomacy. And I'll divide it in 3 blocks. As I was asked, I'll do brief introductions on the Czech Centers, the Czech Centers network, and then maybe I'll share the experience with the after Brexit environment in UK, and of course what the Czech Center does in the science diplomacy. So the Czech Center, as you might know, it's part of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's contributory organizations of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's integral part of the foreign policy, in particular in the public diplomacy. So it's kind of the extended arm of the ministry. The core of the activities is the culture diplomacy, really in the broadest sense. And then to say that the science diplomacy is part of it, and of course varies center by center, where the science diplomacy is taking a larger part in our programming and where not. And the main mission of the Czech Center is really to promote the good name of the Czech Republic around the world. Currently, we have about 27 centers from New York, mostly in Europe, all the way to Japan. And there are 2 Czech houses. One is in Jerusalem and one is in Bratislava. There might be in the future some new ones as well. So if I may gradually move now to share the perspective on the UK and the Brexit. So it's rather difficult to find positive outcomes of the Brexit, especially in these areas or in the line of work which we do. Let me just mention the Horizon EU program. 95% 5 billion euros across those years being financed and supported different countries. So that's the amount, or fraction of that amount, which of course was going historically to the UK, and UK contributed to it, which is not there. Today, the UK is negotiating the association agreement. All the topic is a bit over and some, maybe on some even more important geopolitical discussions and arrangement about the UK and European Union. So the UK research and innovations kind of step in. I have a note here with 280 million pounds to kind of mitigate the shortcomings, as the UK is not the fully fledged member of the Horizon, but it's a very small fraction of it, and the detrimental impact, what we're hearing from the science universities infrastructure is really detrimental. Another outcome of the Brexit is there have been number of the ERC teams that fled UK to Europe, especially because of the difficulty of the personnel and attracting the top scientists moving to UK. I know if we have some representative here in the audience from universities, what we're seeing also in our line of work at the Czech Center, we work a lot with the students coming on Erasmus to UK. So Erasmus, as you know, has stopped, basically is ending by the end of this year. Maybe if there are some funds, so it might go to the mid of the next year. So Erasmus Plus, as we have known it, it will not be available to the UK or to European students coming to UK, and of course the British coming to Europe, which is tremendous shortcoming, which I see personally. The discussions are now on the bilateral agreement, so the larger countries like Germany, France, they are discussing the bilateral arrangement with UK, but again, we have many other countries which cannot participate in the program. So that would be at least something for the universities maybe here can step in with their own allocated budget for their own students. So, so they can still go and travel, spend some time in the UK. As I have mentioned, the ERC grants and the team fleeing, the UK government announced last year new program attracting the top scientists to UK. It was very medialized through number of the media outlets. I think they announced there are going to be 300 positions. After 6 months, there are only four applications received to the UK. It just shows the change in the mindset, the rest of the Europe vis-a-vis the Britain, and how the collaboration is getting more cumbersome and more challenging in this respect because of Brexit. But hopefully there will be some more and more positive news we can share going forward. In the second part, I would like to share what the Czech Center does in practice in the area of the science diplomacy. My background is a little bit in science, as I spent a couple of years here in the Academy of Sciences in Charles University. So it's rather close to it, and also in the parts of technology. So I like to share a few of the very specific activities which we have launched over the last 3 years there in London. One is we call it the Science Cafe on Artificial Intelligence. And I want to mention few names just to know the scope, as there are a number of really leading people here in the Czech Republic, like Michal Pěchouček in the personal and cybersecurity from the Czech Technical University. Now he ventured for the more private business, the CTA at AVAST. So there was discussion and presentation focused on this topic. also on the topic of autonomous mobility by Michal Čáp, who is Czech Technical University again, an MIT person currently on the topic of conversational AI, a great team again from Prague, which have won a few times the Alexas Prize, led by Jiří Šedivý, also Tomáš Krajník on the criminal robotics, or Jonathan Ledgard on the AI and wildlife. I'm mentioning all of them so you can see the broad scope. And what's been rather positive that we really have a good engagement from the local partnership on the university level, with the Imperial College, King's College, or the Royal Institutions of Science. So that happened 2 years ago. And the learning lessons to be perhaps even more effective, to expand that activity to more international approach. So we offered that particular product or that project, the Science Cafe series, to UNIC. The UNIC is an association of the European Culture Institutes and Embassies. In London is rather representative, with over 35 members. There were quite tremendous interest from the membership. There were 15 countries participating in the next year in this series. We engaged the moderators. There were the leading personnel, the British personnel who were running it from Oxford University, from Alan Turing Institute, from Victoria Albert Museum. And it brought really very coherent and very impactful program on the science. Of course, the overarching theme was still the same, artificial intelligence, how that's changing art, how that's changing visual art, performing art, the ethics and philosophy of AI, also the legal framework, which is very often lagging behind, of course, the technology. So those were the topics which we have discussed. We also wanted to focus a little bit more on the women. The first year which we have run, it was mostly 80%, almost 90% men-run presentation. In this second year, is the unique AI Science Cafe, we get over 60% of women participating in it. So we're very pleased with that outcome. We really wanted to show that the women are very strong contributors on this technological, if you want, topics as well. Last piece which I like to share with you are projects which have been initiated here in Prague and have traveled around the globe. And there are in particular two exhibitions. The first one I was honored to lead, which was called the Czech Innovation Expo. It's a project which basically combine art, design, the theme of science and innovation and modern digital technology. And the communication platform is the digital technology. There are the applications that you download to all your smart devices, and then you see them displayed on the wall. They unfold, they present the story. It's very interactive. As I mentioned, it traveled again from the US, many countries in Europe to Asia. The very interesting outcome was in Asia, as I think the societies are even more advanced in using technology. It was in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Tokyo, in Mirakan, which is a top-notch technological institutions. The project was such well received, and the project that presented the Czech innovators, past and present. It also presented the Czech companies, again, the kind of traditional companies like Skoda Auto, Crystalex, but the new one like Lasvit or Avast or many other ones. And the third pillar of this exhibition was innovation map that presented startup community here in the Czech Republic. So it really targeted younger entrepreneurial, but also scientific community. And the last project I really would like to share is derived on the same notion. So the pillars are the same, the ingredients is. One is the artistic rendering of the exhibition, which was the designer by Pavel Fuchsa. The format was again digital technology through the application, through the augmented reality. The first I have not mentioned was the virtual reality as well. So the second project here is only the augmented reality. And the topic this time is on sustainability and how innovation and science does help sustainability or achieve the sustainability goals. And the backbone of this project is the 17 SDGs goal. This project has been launched also here in Prague at the National Museum. We have opened it 2 months ago at the Europe House in London, close to Westminster. It was very well received by the broader audience as well as the media. So to conclude, very brief kind of wrap-ups. So what we feeling, or what I see personally, there is a shift from the national perspective more to the collaborative international approach. I think we receive much better perception, not only from the public, but also from the media interest. And as the Czech chair, as I said, we are promoting the good name of the Czech Republic, but not only the Czech Republic, now leading the EU. So that was the first one. The second, in terms of the promotion, the areas which resonate rather well are, of course, the sustainability, environment, climate. So that's the one. The second, it would be life sciences and health. It also attracts a lot of interest. And the third, in general, is advanced technology. It doesn't have to be the digital technology, but the AI, the technology advance, and how that's going to impact our lives. And the last concluding remarks, the way we tend to communicate, we found it very productive if we really embrace the modern technology, the social media, but also the digital technology through these smart devices. If people can download it, they can take it from the conference, from exhibition, from the discussion panel, they can come to it through in the digital format. I think it gets us much further than the panel discussion or any other events we have been organized. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. My follow-up question would be actually on the strange situation after Brexit, but you answered that quite extensively. You asked for academic representatives. Well, I don't know. I hope we have them also in the audience, but we have them also on the panel. This is why I'm coming now to my last panelist, which is Dr. Eliška Tomalova. Dr. Tomalova is the head of the European Studies Department at the Institute of International Studies in the Faculty of Social Science at the Charles University in Prague. And she is also the program director of the European Politics and Society Erasmus Mundus Joint Master Degree. And finally, she is also a member of the European Science Diplomacy Alliance. So now we are coming to you are here, the representative of the academia. So basically one of the main, not even the stakeholder of the science diplomacy. And we would like actually to hear your perspective, how you see the universities, the role of the universities in science diplomacy. And floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matthias. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Euroscience and the Senate for inviting me and paying attention to science diplomacy in international relations. As you said, Matthias, my journey with science diplomacy started more than 5 years ago with S44C. It was an Horizon project devoted to science diplomacy, and we had also sister projects inside and ELSIT. So it was really a window of opportunity for practitioners and academics to cooperate on the topic of public diplomacy. Then the alliance was created in order to sustain and grow the network of practitioners and academics. Our colleague from the Commission also talked about the Spanish presidency, the upcoming Spanish presidency. So in 2018, there was a Madrid Declaration on science diplomacy that was signed as a result of a first global meeting on science diplomacy. So I was really glad to be part of this adventure. Dovolte mi, abych pokračovala v češtině na půdě českého.
So I'm going to switch into Czech because I'm in the Czech Senate, and I'll speak about the specific role of a university in science diplomacy. And I'll try to slow down. And I'll also talk about a university being a stakeholder of science diplomacy. And I'll try to also outline possible opportunities and challenges of the cooperation between science and foreign policy. So what diplomacy can offer to a university and what a university can offer to diplomacy. At present, our university is very active internationally, but we're not primarily an international actor, but internationalization is an important part of its survival in the international environment. So internalization in this context relates both to teaching and doing science. These are two areas that our university offers, and two areas that are closely interconnected from the scientific and research perspective, but also the stress that we place on students. So where does diplomacy and university meet in these activities? Well, of course, in our teaching activities. In our fields of study, we try to educate future diplomats. Many our graduates work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, at embassies abroad, but they also do international agendas at various other institutions. We are closely in touch with the non-academic world. Of course, you cannot live in a silo, and the students rightly call on us to open contacts for them with the non-academic world so that they are better ready to enter the world of work later on. So we invite science diplomats, we invite our colleagues from abroad that deal with science diplomacy, and they speak to our students, and we try to accentuate that cooperation in our teaching efforts across fields of study. So we talk to colleagues from other fields of studies, and we try to have a comprehensive perspective on the current world, because that's what then is transferred as an experience to the diplomatic practice. Of course, diplomacy and university also meet in the field of science and research, because universities are centers of research. We also look at how to develop methods of work in research, because the research work has its specific methods, just as diplomacy has its specific methods. And not always these specificities meet. We have to understand that we work in different time cycles, we have different methods of cooperation, and convergence is very fruitful for both worlds. University also plays a huge huge social role, but we have a huge network of graduates. That's important for us because that's our contact with the outside world. And it's also important for the world of diplomacy and research, because we're in touch with these graduates, and they act or can act as ambassadors of science and research. Our activities have a huge impact on public, because the university takes part in public debates. We open scientific topics for discussion, so we can get closer to people, and we can bring the foreign policy dimension closer to the local public. And we can open various points of discussion which often are not presented as priority by the politicians. But we're also in touch with foreign public, because our university has a part of para-diplomatic activities. And again, our network is really fruitful if we connect it better with the world of diplomacy, and if we offer cooperation between our network and the foreign service network. So that's what is specific about what the university does. But at the same time, university understands each other as a stakeholder of scientific diplomacy. We're an important stakeholder when it comes to the brand, its size in the European university sphere. But of course, our involvement has certain weak points, and maybe we share these weak points with our colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other ministries involved in scientific diplomacy, science diplomacy. We heard that there's a problem with the terminology, with the word of science diplomacy. Different ministries understand that phrase differently. Different scientific organizations have a different understanding of this. So in line with the fragmentation of our foreign policy, we have all sorts of diplomacies. We have economic, cultural, public, SPA, and so forth. And sometimes we get lost in that. And it's good to get back to the core, what it really means to do science diplomacy, whether it means to promote science or whether it means to replace the problematic other types of diplomacy with the less problematic science diplomacy. And we've had that opportunity a number of times in the past. So does it also mean knowledge transfer to foreign policy? From my perspective, that's the most problematic point. So sometimes I ask myself whether it is good to call that activity science diplomacy, because science diplomacy is such a broad term and people understand it differently. Another weakness is that the set of stakeholders is rather complicated. Science diplomacy has a strong domestic dimension, so to orientate yourself in the domestic world is sometimes difficult. Every stakeholder has its own vested interest. So to find a common solution that we offer to the outside world can be quite complicated. Also, many stakeholders that had a monopoly on foreign policy in the past do not have that monopoly any longer. Diplomacy is not a task only for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's not just a task for the diplomats. Every ministry is active in international cooperation. So when you have such a wider network of diplomacy, you have to find space for science diplomacy, not only where you would naturally locate it, that is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Office of the Government, but you also have to find its role in other stakeholding organizations. And the last weak point, again, relates to the language and understanding. It is not clear what we expect from each other. It's not entirely clear what the world of foreign affairs or diplomacy and university expect from each other. So do we want to promote each other and our activities? Or do we expect that we help finance each other, that diplomacy helps finance scientific projects, for example? Or that the university will sponsor diplomatic activities, or co-sponsor at least? Do we expect a longer-term involvement that will really involve the teachers and scientific workers, diplomats, or do we rather expect an ad hoc involvement and cooperation? These are questions that we ask ourselves every day when we talk about how we can contribute to the cooperation between our university and foreign policy. Last but not least, I am an optimist when it comes to the future of science diplomacy. And I think that my optimism stems from my nature, the way I am set up naturally, but I also believe that the two worlds have a lot to learn from each other when it comes to working methods or expertise. Not one of these two worlds has enough time or finance or human resources to do it on its own. So they will have to cooperate. And also, we're a small state, so we cannot cover all the global topics, and we cannot cover all the foreign policy agendas. So we're searching for niches in foreign policy and in diplomacy that we can focus at. And of course, foreign research and diplomacy and the university world can help a lot, because then we can come up with topics that we can properly frame in various types of diplomacy. We've mentioned the Sustainability Development Goals, SDGs. That's a huge opportunity. SDGs helped structure administration of many member states. It helped interdisciplinary cooperation. It's a huge change to learn how to interconnect scientific fields of study with administration and sometimes also with the politics, and to connect the fields of study that sometimes are not called hard sciences, such as social sciences, for example. And last but not least, I'd like to mention as a good example, water diplomacy, which is one of the areas that we looked at. Of course, it's an excellent example of interconnecting a number of fields of study because water is borderless. Water knows no borders. It can play a role, cultural, migration, security roles. And I think that the European Union was highly inspirational when it comes to creating a specific field of specialization in science diplomacy. And it concentrated, it attracted a huge amount of scientific and also diplomatic actors. So I think that diplomacy and university, these are two worlds that can support each other. And in the context of university cooperation, let me once again highlight the need to interconnect research and teaching, because as part of teaching, we educate our future scientists and we teach them how to cooperate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very, very nice insights in the view of the universities, of the academic community on science diplomacy. After the initial presentations are now over, and I thank to all the panelists to give really this very nice overview of their views as stakeholders, I would now like to open the floor for the audience. Unfortunately, we don't have a microphone going around, so if you would like to answer a question, ask a question, you have to either speak loud from your place, or you can go here to the front and use the microphone here to the front. Are there any questions, any interest? Oh, yes, please, first. Please come, please come.
Oh, thank you. So, hello everyone. Thank you very much for a very nice presentation. My name is Jiří Marek. I'm from Masaryk University, and I would like to ask two questions. First one to all the panel regarding what's the role of cities and region in science diplomacy. And now I'm saying in the context of, for example, what's happening in Barcelona with SciTech Diplo Hub, and also with Science Meet Region, Science Meet Parliaments with Joint Research Centrum of the European Commission. And second question is to Mrs. Tomalova regarding universities. What do you think is the connection between open science and science diplomacy, if you see some of these connections? Open science topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we can start with Ms. Russo.
Thank you very much. If you allow me, I also will pick up on the second question on the connection between open science and science diplomacy, because that's a very important one. And I think that, as you know, the European Commission promotes as much as possible open science, both within the EU context and the EU programs at international level. This is one of the main topics that we are discussing within the EU Research and Innovation G7 meetings, and also that we discuss within the multilateral framework, multilateral dialogue that we launched within the global approach to research and innovation, our policy that I mentioned earlier on. And I don't want to pick up on the reply that was asked to another participant, but I think that open science is key for promoting science diplomacy. That's a statement I would like to make. In terms of the roles of cities and regions in science diplomacy, again, I think that we should mobilize all the relevant actors in the EU member states to promote science diplomacy. And again, my reply can be a bit simplistic, but we can have an impact in that only if we join forces and if we're working together. And in the European Commission, I will not list all of them because I don't want to get too detailed, but we are really putting all the different activities and endeavors to promote the participation of cities and regions to our activities, EU activities. Let me just mention the cities mission, for example, that is a key component of the Horizon Europe program, which indeed has an important international cooperation dimension, and it's also a vehicle to bring science diplomacy and to promote it outside Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say we are just going one place going on. Mr. Pela.
Yes, thank you for the question. So I'll respond to the first part on cities and regions vis-a-vis the science diplomacy. I believe it's in core of that, because the universities, the research centers, infrastructures, innovative hubs, they are in the cities and in the regions. If you bring it from the top government to this level, it's very often the communication might be even more effective. So we, as a Czech Center, and we have some experiences from the past, really welcome this approach. But at the same time, I would also advise, it's very important to set the objectives. What should be the objective of such a collaboration? Is it, as has been mentioned, is it just more general promotion and raising awareness of the region, or of the city, or of the Maastricht University, for instance? Or is the objective to students recruitment, for instance, for the university? Or it might be also seeking a research partnership, which we have done in the past. An outcome of some of the event that there is a new partnership set up between MIT, the Czech Technical University, and the King's College. So that was the outcome, and there's a new project line up as a result of that. So I think the cities and region, absolutely yes, but at the same time, very important to set the objectives. What are the expectations, and how you will achieve this on the both sides.
Thank you very much. Landry?
If I may, I would like to focus on the first question about the role of cities and regions in science diplomacy. Had the opportunity, quite new at the DLR, but I had the opportunity to work on several projects related to city diplomacy and urban diplomacy. And as you know, city diplomacy, urban diplomacy is a practice that has emerged a couple of years ago, and that will play a key role in the future, since experts say by 2050 about 75% of the world population will concentrate itself in cities. That means cities will be the place where the future of our planet will be decided, and that's the reason why we have to focus on this kind of praxis. And that's the reason why we have to promote the interaction between science diplomacy, city diplomacy, urban diplomacy. And we have to think about the way to make this diplomacy that is still a kind of improvised diplomacy. We have to think about the best way to shape this practice in a proper way to give it a more important impact.
Thank you. Eliška?
Thank you for your question. As Maria Christian Rousseau said, I feel that open science is really deeply connected with science diplomacy. There is no credibility in science diplomacy if there is no open science. When we launched the S4D4C project, we had a colleague that was responsible for the open science principles and regulations, so that the project is in line with these principles. And we could learn a lot from this specific project, because at that time, I must say that the knowledge we got about open science at the Czech university was not very high. So there is a difference, there's still a difference between colleagues who are involved in international and European projects that are aware of open science regulations. They also publish in line with open science principle, and those who are not really involved in more international cooperation. There is a lot of work to do for us to inform our colleagues about it, to give them instruments, maybe organize workshops, and really to inform better about open science. For some of us, it's still a buzzword, and we don't really know what it means in our everyday work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that answers. Okay, very good. There was a second question. Yes, please come to the front.
Okay, thank you. My name is Hong Wei Yan. I'm coming from Taipei office in Prague. My question is this one. Our panelist just mentioned about the science diplomacy is not a clear terminology. So I want to ask more about this one. Do you believe the science diplomacy can beyond the traditional international diplomacy? Or what's the relationship between the science diplomacy and the international diplomacy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I would start with the view of the European Commission.
Thank you very much to our colleague from Taiwan. This is one of those key questions that we keep on reflecting and thinking. I mean, which is the relation between science diplomacy and international cooperation in research and innovation, which is something that as a director for international cooperation and the global approach, I keep on asking, and which is the relationship between science diplomacy and international diplomacy. I mean, I do not think that we can give a clear-cut reply with a clear-cut definition on what falls within international cooperation, research, innovation, and science diplomacy, and what falls within international cooperation and in general and science diplomacy. We have been, of course, on the science diplomacy, we all refer to the 2010 definition that we all know, so I would not need to repeat it. But what I think is that in every time that through international cooperation in research and innovation, we manage to promote the discussion, to restrict the gap between those governments, those that have not a fluid relationship as we would have. We have achieved something in terms of science diplomacy. And also, when you think about the relations with international cooperation, every time that we, through science, make it possible to build on, to move ahead on, to provide, let's say, a positive contribution to our international agenda, then we have made a step forward. So I think that we don't have an interest, that's my personal view, but it's one of the points that we are discussing within this science diplomacy agenda, to have clear-cut definitions and saying where something stops and where the other continues. I think we really have an interest in creating a synergy and a continuity between international cooperation, research, innovation, science, diplomacy, and international cooperation. And again, I don't want to be repetitive, but I think the key there is to really create this fusion of interest, of objectives between us, the people working in research innovation, and our colleagues that are working on foreign relations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So basically you are saying a holistic approach between all the different playgrounds. I would actually ask Landry what is his view from his experience in the national services of diplomacy on this.
Yeah, that's a very important and good question. Thank you very much for that. From the French perspective, science diplomacy is an integral part of our diplomacy of influence. That is very important to keep this in mind. And that's the reason why science diplomacy must play a key role by shaping the international relations. And I would say the fact that the French president, Emmanuel Macron, mentioned it on the 9th of November when he presented the new French security strategy says a lot about the role science diplomacy has to play at the international level. And you also have to keep in mind the fact that science diplomacy in France, and I don't know the situation in Europe, but science diplomacy is mostly designed by our Minister for Foreign Affairs, and not only by our Minister for Research, Innovation and Education, but mostly, and the most important part of our strategy in the field of science diplomacy is designed by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I think it says a lot about the role science diplomacy has to play from our perspective at the international level.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pehler, how do you see it also in relation to cultural diplomacy? Is it something complementary, competitive? How do you see it?
Yeah, I would not see it as a competitive, definitely. It might be complementary with another different diplomacies, but I think all of them do come together as you're trying to promote the good faith or good name of the country you do represent, as you're trying to enhance the relationships among these two countries, whatever area that there would be. And just a brief note, as my colleagues from the panel answered the previous questions, I think very well. I would say that the science diplomacy also embraces the communication function to it, very importantly. As the international collaboration, its existence among the universities, among the research centers, Academy of Sciences, we don't need science diplomacy as such for this institute and bodies to collaborate on a number of projects. So the science diplomacy, as has been just said here, sometimes also design the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and different other ministries or other government bodies contribute to it. But then if we do take the science diplomacy abroad in the particular country, for that it's very important the communication, the presentation role of that, the packaging it. And that's gonna come back what we have been discussing. What is the objective for the particular? And the communication is usually very important part of that among the other elements.
Thank you very much. Eliška, do you have some thoughts on that?
Briefly, it's not easy to describe it because there's no single model of science diplomacy. So you can see different models across Europe and across the world. As Przemysl described culture diplomacy, you have culture diplomacies that are more driven by the Ministry of Culture, and culture diplomacies where some kind of agency is stronger, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the main initiator. The same for science diplomacy. For me, the big difference is I consider international scientific cooperation as a para-diplomatic activity. It goes in line with foreign policy, but it may have also other objectives, and it is not directly linked to state administration. On the other hand, in science diplomacy, there is a strong link that should be openly, described as a link between state administration and science. It shouldn't be hidden somewhere behind, then it's not fair, open foreign policy. But again, the link with foreign policy is clear. It can be driven also by research institutions, but in cooperation with the state or driven by the state. It depends on the context. In an appropriate diplomatic context where the cooperation with the other state or states has a, let's say, a very positive environment, it's more easily for the state to operate. In the international arena, in other situations, maybe the research institutions have more possibilities. But again, the link to the state is clear, transparent, and not hidden. Thank you.
Thank you for this valuable insight. There was a question, right? Yeah, Peter Kaiser.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for interesting debate to all the panelists. I don't actually have a question, but rather a remark, if I may. I think it was you, Matthias, who raised the question of Brexit, and it was mentioned several times as well during the discussion, the relationship of European Union with the other countries like Switzerland and so on and so forth, who would associate with working with us in research. And I would like to actually underline how important the topic is for the European Union to be really very active in these policies of enabling other countries to associate with us, especially those countries who are really powerhouses in research and can contribute substantially to European research, as well as to promoting globally the interests and principles and objectives on which the European research is based. I think it's in tackling climate change and so forth. I think it's a very important issue, as well as I think it's very important that European Union is more and more active in reaching out to other partners via the agreements on funding of specific programs. So I think this is a very important task for science diplomacy, where actually the foreign policy, security policies, economic interests of the EU and research meet in a very, I would say, concrete manner, thus actually contributing to some global issues like, as I said, tackling the global change, the climate change. So I would like to underline that because we got the instruments like Horizon Europe and many other programs that we can utilize for that. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, sure, of course, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you very much for recalling the importance of association. And I think that the UK situation is a very specific one. I wouldn't repeat what you very eloquently said. So that's a bit of a specific case. Indeed, I also think it's very important to promote association. And with Horizon Europe, we have a new possibility to associate like-minded countries which have a high science and technology level of development. We are now in a situation whereby both us and the Canadian have the mandate to negotiate the possibility of associating to the Horizon Europe program. But I would like also to say, for the clarity of the issue, that Horizon Europe is basically completely open to the participation of researchers and research organizations from outside the world. And as the minister mentioned in her introduction, for example, Pillar 2, which is the instrument that we have in order to tackle many of those societal challenges that you refer to, the climate change and so on. It's a part of the program in which international partners can fully join consortia and work together. So I took the floor to just clarify that indeed association is important, but I also would like to mention that we already do have the instruments in order to be very strong in terms of international cooperation. I would like also to say that now, in last week, we have launched the second batch of topics under the work program 2023-24 in Horizon Europe, where again we have the full openness for research organizations from outside Europe to participate. On the top of that, we have 22% of the calls which specifically flag international cooperation, And we have also two specific initiatives, one on Africa and one on South Med. So indeed, association very important, but let's mobilize our science community to fully tap the potential offered under Horizon Europe, while seeing this progress in terms of stricter relations with some key partners outside Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts within the panel on the... Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, Advisor, for the note. Maybe just a short note now. Maybe as I thinking about as was presenting the outcome of the Brexit, it shouldn't be that I see some positive, development there as well. Obviously, it's very clear that it's not only beneficial for the UK to be part of, and it's not only the Horizon part of the Europe as such, the European collaboration, but at the same time, it's very valuable for Europe to have the UK and intensify the relationship. And it's true, there's rather complex discussions going on now between Brussels and London. A number of issues, and a very important issue is the North Irish Protocol, and part of the discussions is also the Horizon, and there's really strong impetus and impulse from other sides, including the United States, to come to an agreement on the GFA, the Good Friday Agreement, which will have the anniversary, I believe, in April of next year. So I'm really positive in that sense that over the next 3 months, I think we should see a significant progress, positive progress, in a number of issues, and I believe the science and research collaboration will be one of the positive outcomes. It's just my personal opinion I would like to share with you, just being in UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other?
Thank you for bringing this topic. We are already feeling the results, the impact of Brexit on the university cooperation. We are doing our best to keep the ties with our British colleagues. We think it's extremely important because scientific cooperation and science diplomacy, it's a long-term investment. So it shouldn't be, let's say, too pragmatic. We should also be idealistic in a way and invest in future generations. So keep our colleagues within our projects. Nevertheless, well, however, it's very, very complicated and sometimes costly. On the other hand, there is not only collaboration in science diplomacy, there's competition as well. So what can we feel already is the changing, let's say, structure of international students coming to our joint degrees, international programs, because it's getting more difficult to get to the UK. So we should be ready for this change and adapt to the changing structure of the students' cohorts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, there is always two sides also in science diplomacy. Any other comments from the... Yeah, please, come forward.
The green button.
Thank you, Professor. I'm so happy to be here. I see many friendly faces. I see Peter Kaiser, who works with us. I see Professor Drahoš, who is very much, I consider also my friend. I'm from Eli Eric, the extreme light infrastructure, the first subject under European law established on the territory of the Czech Republic. This is a big change. We are in the club. We have a large research infrastructure on our territory and on the territory of Hungary. I speak English because the working language of our center is English, not Czech. My comment to the Brexit thing is we have a new director for science of the Eli Eric, Andrew Harrison, a British citizen. And we have many other people coming to us, users, scientists, managers from all kinds of countries. But my question is, thank you for being here because Mr. Busquin introduced the concept of the European Research Area in 2009 to the European Union. It was revisited later by the German presidency in 2009, and then again for the new one last presidency of the German Republic. So how can the scientific diplomacy contribute to the building of the European Research Area? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to share with you the happiness of being here. I'm also very happy to be here. And I'm also very happy that you mentioned the launching of the European Research Area, which was done under the leadership of Philippe Busquin. I had the honor of being part of his team and to be the one that has prepared and negotiated the provision which is now in the treaty as a legal basis for the European Research Area. So that's a question which is very dear to my heart. You also mentioned, I remember already that in 2004, I think, we issued a communication on the external dimension of the European Research Area. No, it was before 2004, must have been around 2003. Just 1 year afterwards, we launched the European Research Area in order really to state that, that in fact, what is the European Research Area is to have synergies amongst the member states in order to have a greater impact for the research activities, both in the EU but outside. And in fact, the point was that this synergy should be sought not only in what the member states do within the European Union with the large research infrastructures and lot of activities and good developments have taken place in this respect, but also in the activities that member states carry out outside Europe. And this is very important. I think that you have direct experience here can also confirm that, and it was said also before, that what any member state can do outside Europe can have a much bigger impact only if we do together, only if we act as Team Europe, as we say it now. I also heard the word competition earlier on, which was referred to students, but I am aware also that there can be sometimes a competition amongst the positioning of our member states outside the EU. But again, the work that we should do as a prolongation of the era is really trying to build on those synergies, on what we can better achieve if we work together and how we can have a greater impact working together and coordinating as much as possible. Let me just say in a more bureaucratic now terms that under the ERA agenda there are different points, and there is the item 9 of the agenda which relates to international cooperation. And in this framework we have an ERA subgroup on the global approach to which Euroscience participates. And there also we are really discussing with the member states on our key strategic activities on international cooperation in order to make sure, at least to put all the instruments in place, to try to have synergies and connections between what we are doing outside Europe with this aim of having this greater impact in our endeavors with third countries. It's a work that needs to be done constantly, and any instrument for reinforcing the dialogue between member states inside Europe and outside Europe, including through this science diplomacy agenda, would be instrumental to make it a success.
Thank you very much. Was this okay? Very good. Any other comments on the ERA on science diplomacy? Okay, so, another comment. Anna.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting discussion. I have more theoretical question, because you mentioned, we talk about the science diplomacy, culture diplomacy, cities diplomacy, but I started to thinking about what is the difference between these topics, diplomacy and soft power. What do you feel the difference when we start thinking about the values? Where is because it's very it's not the same, it's similar, but it's not the same like the definition, but I think that the difference is very important. Thank you. It's open question.
If you don't mind, I would actually ask Landry, because he was quoting, I think, a former French foreign minister or president who said there is no soft power, but just hard power. So what's your take on that question?
And you ask for the difference between soft power and the concept. From our perspective, there is no difference. The concept, as you probably know, has been forged a couple of years ago by the American researcher Joseph Nye of soft power. And a long time we considered science diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and other aspects of our diplomacy as a integral part of soft power. But from our point of view, and since 2019, everything is now in this big pot, and everything is hard power because of the current evolution of the international relations, because of the brutalization of the world. Nothing can be considered anymore as soft. Everything is becoming hard. That's the French point of view.
Thank you. Any other comment on that? Yeah, sure.
I mean, I also tend to agree that we should not get into like a theoretical definition. And just I would like to recall to the way we address to science diplomacy in the global approach communication, which I always bring with me, saying that science diplomacy would help the European Union to project soft power. So, I mean, that is a connection that science diplomacy helps to project that power, but without really defining trying to look for a distinction between science diplomacy and the soft power.
Yeah, Mr. Peter?
Very long and interesting theoretical debate, but I try to be brief about it. Well, the theoretical discussion about the duality of power it's a huge thing. Thank you for mentioning it. And as you said, it started with Joseph Nye, but then he also continued with the concept of smart power, which is very interesting to science diplomacy as merging, let's say, the benefits of both. Sometimes we also criticize soft power, saying that it's just an iron fist in a velvet glove. So it's more appealing to our foreign audiences. But what's interesting now, I think, is that with following the Russian aggression to Ukraine, we've been paying more attention to culture and science in foreign policy, because there is a lot of securitization linked to both agendas. We feel that these two agendas that are interlinked can become a weapon in the conflict. Is it dangerous for science and culture because it can be more instrumentalized by foreign policy and we will lose some kind of freedom that we cherish so much? Or is it an opportunity for agenda setting in science diplomacy and culture diplomacy? I think it's a question for all of us here. So I'm still wondering, because in theoretical debates, but also in foreign policy practice, we are coming back to some sort of more realistic thinking in international relations, to more pragmatic Cold War sometimes understanding of power play in international relations. So we're still waiting what it does to science and culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pela, you wanted to also take the word.
Yes, in my view, to soft power, there are a number of other sub-powers or different kinds of diplomacy that are feeding into the the umbrella, the overarching, what we call the soft power. The science diplomacy is one of them, small one, I would rather say. The culture diplomacy, there is sport diplomacy, there are so many other different feeds. Then you talk about the brand, the national brand, which is very different scientific discipline by itself. But I would not necessarily agree that soft power equals hard power. So hard power is the realpolitik, there's the security, etc. Now, of course, which all of us are witnessing, the Russian aggression in Ukraine is not the war in Ukraine, is the Russian aggression there. So any soft power on Russia disappears whatsoever. Even Russia is to have very strong soft power in arts, in ballet, music, etc. literature. It's totally wipe out in sport. They still do maintain hard power. There's no question about that. So I would say that the countries do contribute, different agents, not necessarily only government agencies or agents abroad, contribute to the soft power. And in my view, it's opportunity. It's the great opportunity that the countries then can use. It's the really door opening for the real politics discussions on various levels. So soft power it's clearly here, and there are many contributing parties to it, and the science diplomacy is a very important part of that, in my view.
Thank you very much. Now that we are already starting to tap into the topic of the second panel, and and also that I was told the coffee break is already prepared. Just for your information, we moved the coffee break a quarter of an hour early because of a terrible misjudgment on my side that I thought that the panel might be too long. But as I said, it's a misjudgment. I think we could discuss very long about this. And I see also that there are a lot of discussions that have to be going on. We heard a lot about the interactions between the different stakeholders, the different languages, also the great potentials on all sides. And so I hope that this panel helped a little bit to frame those questions, to give an opportunity to speak about it, and that everyone here learned also a thing or two. I for sure did. And I would like to thank very, very much to our panelists and for their open and very informative answers. Again, thanks to the hosts. And I would say we are moving on at 11:45 with the second panel, more concrete on a more concrete, but also much, much more terrible case of science diplomacy, which is the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And thanks to the audience for your participation, for your for your attention, and for bearing with me as a moderator. Thank you very much.
We can start it. Welcome for the second part of the conference on science diplomacy, which is begun with the framework of the Czech presidency in the European Union. The conference is organized by Senate and of the Czech Parliament and the Euroscience. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay, closer. Thank you one more time, Professor Jerzy Drachos, for hosting us today with this marvelous place. The discussion that will take place now is dedicated to a very important topic, scientific diplomacy in the context of war in Ukraine. Allow me to introduce my wonderful guests before we start the discussion. They are today with us Oksana Semenicht, director of the very important program for the Ukrainian researcher and also very involved in Humboldt Foundation. Oksana told us something more during the discussion about the new program. Mr. Paweł Poszetek, director of the National Agency of the Erasmus Plus and the European Solidarity Corpus programs, a very important foundation for exchange and cooperation in partnership on the higher education institution. Our professional diplomat, Mr. Peter Kaiser, Special Envoy for Science Diplomacy, the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome. Mr. Hong Wei, Director Science and Technology Division, Taipei Economics and Culture Office in Prague. And special representatives from the next European City of Science, Eva Gajewska-Nowara. Welcome. Before we start our discussion, I would like to ask Eva to read the letter from our major from Poland, major from Katowice, in the context of war in Ukraine, but also in the context on next European City of Science. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Mayor of Katowice, I would like to thank you for invitation to this conference. Unfortunately, Mayor cannot be here today because of his duties, but he wrote a letter and I will read it right now. I will continue in Czech language.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to participate at this conference. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the organizers for meeting the challenge to prepare this meeting. At the same time, I apologize for not being able to be with you because the duties linked with the administration of my city, Katowice, do not allow me to appear in person. But I'd like to wish you a fruitful dialogue that will help you propose solutions appropriate to the topic. Russia's barbaric aggression against Ukraine in February this year was an unprecedented event in recent European history. And now, as you're listening to my letter in the beautiful city of Prague, millions of Ukrainians are fighting for freedom and independence against the occupying forces, and they're paying the ultimate price. The bombs of the invaders kill dozens of civilians every day, including women and children. Millions of Ukrainians are freezing in their homes. They don't have heat, electricity, water, or food. And the approaching winter means even further deepening of the humanitarian crisis. So this dramatic situation has become a huge challenge for our countries, Ukraine's closest neighbors. Thanks to selfless cooperation of thousands of people, institutions, local authorities, and businessmen, we have been able to provide effective and genuine help and assistance to refugees since the first days of the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, even though it's almost been 10 months since the beginning of the invasion, Russia has not abandoned its plans and help is still needed. And let me give you some numbers, just to give you an idea how much help is needed. In Katowice, the city of 300,000 inhabitants, we have almost 50,000 Ukrainian refugees. We provide free accommodation, schools for children, food. We help them to find jobs. We implement integration projects so that the Ukrainian refugees feel that Katowice is their second home. We also send humanitarian transports. Recently, in recent months, I visited Lviv twice, and we spoke with Mayor Sadovy about the most urgent needs of the residents. The topic of this year's Euroscience conference is certainly a challenge, but I'm convinced that the presence of you, the practitioners and the experts in your fields of study, will bear much good fruit, because only together we can face this great test. So let me invite you all to Katowice. Katowice has been awarded the title of the European City of Science 2024. So in 2 years, we will organize Euroscience Open Forum 2024 conference, and you're all invited. I hope that just like here in Prague, the meeting in Katowice in 2 years' time will be a chance to discuss our common future. So see you in Katowice. Sincerely, Mayor of Katowice, Marcin Krupa. I also prepared a short introduction to accompany this letter to show to you in numbers how much Katowice helped Ukraine. So according to the numbers, the figures of the Association of Polish Municipalities, the number of refugees in Katowice in March 2022 reached 96,000, including 19,000 children. Then it dropped down to 62,000 in May this year. Katowice so far has issued over 13,000 social security numbers. We have 714 individuals that together with the city were moved to private accommodation, and thousands found accommodation in the facilities of the city. Over 300 of refugees live in the dorms, in the dormitories of the School of Economics in Katowice. So we issued packages, assistance packages to over 3,000 Polish citizens that house Ukrainians at their home. We also provide psychological and mental health practitioners to help these people. We have over 200 employees of social services of Katowice involved in the help provided to Ukrainian refugees. To put it in figures, in Polish zloty, it amounts over 44 million zloty, or 4 million zloty, which is above 9 million euro, 220 million Czech crowns. So the money came from the state budget, from our city's budget, but also from private donors. The latest support was 46 million given to Polish and Ukrainian integration from the UNICEF fund. Till the 25th of November, we've received over 14,000 applications for jobs, or notifications of people that found jobs in Katowice. And we have some 26,000 Ukrainian students studying at our schools in Katowice. So just the latest news about life and economics of relating to the Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and we were asking the respondents whether they would like to return to Ukraine or to stay in Katowice. Half of the refugees would like to return back home. 26% would like to stay and live in Katowice. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Let me add that for Polish citizens, for Poland, this date is a very sad date because we have the imposition of the martial law. And for the Silesian Katowice, it's also the anniversary where the miners were shooting because they protesting against the regime. So you see the figures, and that the brutalization of the politics, it's very common in this part of Europe, and that's why this topic is very important for us, and I think very hot for us. I remember when I was child, these tanks on the streets in my country, Russian tanks. Okay, many scientific institutions and organizations in European countries have condemned the war triggered by the Russian army invasion of Ukraine, which begins on February. These organizations have not only condemned the military aggression, but have also cancelled the scientific cooperation with official Russian institutions. They have also declared their solidarity with the Ukrainian scientific community, together with Russian researchers and academics who have expressed their opposition to their country's government. It was rare, but it's happened. Today we will look at the war in Ukraine in the response of researchers and research institutions from the context of science diplomacy perspective, which focus on the interaction between international scientific cooperation and foreign policy issues. In times of geopolitical tension, as well in the peacetime, individual relationship between researchers and bilateral cooperation between institutions can even become an instrument of parallel diplomacy, as we mentioned in the panel before. But today we are in different situation because the war is ongoing. It's evident that each war postpones exchange, but the choice of ruthless sanction by the scientific institution on European countries has a clear message: stop the cooperation. It's one side of the coin. The second, I think the more important, is how to help the Ukrainian research and academician students, academia community who are in danger, how we can help them today with different model of the assistance on individual model and institutional model. And I would like to talk about this topic with my distinguished guest. Let's pose the open question to my honorable panelists. The war in Ukraine showed that the science diplomacy has become an example of new thinking about diplomacy. It is far away from the traditional conception of diplomacy, which take place in the shuttle of the offices. Now is rapid, supporting model diplomacy. Are you agree with me or not? Oksana, maybe you, because you are very involved in the Ukrainian researcher.
First of all, dziękuję mockrát za pozvání.
First of all, thank you for being invited. It's my great honor to be here, and thank you for supporting Ukraine.
I do believe that in times of war, the concept of traditional diplomacy changes, and people and citizens can act more directly and actually impact on what is happening. And I'm talking here on one hand as a director of the program that was an example of a top-down approach of support, where European Commission extremely quickly decided to support displaced Ukrainian researchers and established Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action for Ukraine. On the other hand, I'm also talking as a representative of Ukrainian diaspora who became active already since 2014, and through the joining forces started to contribute our expertise and knowledge and networks to support Ukrainian researchers, because as we know, the war has not started in February, and the collaboration and interaction was needed also before. And it's exactly this combination of both top-down and bottom-up approaches that become possible and impactful.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank a lot Professor Jiří Drahoš, the vice president of the first vice president of the Senate, and our colleagues from Euroscience for organizing this event. I think it's very timely, and the topic is very, very important. Possibly responding to the question raised by our moderator, I would say at the very outset that I believe that what is happening in Ukraine, the brutal aggression of Putin against Ukraine, the incredible loss of lives and the incredible damage to the country, but as well in other areas in terms of new, I would say, international order or emerging of all-time global policies and rivalries. I think we should really revisit and rethink the concept of science diplomacy. I think up to now, there has been a, I would say, prevailing opinion that the main objective of science diplomacy, as has been referred to also in the previous panel, as the soft power, is to establish contacts, to maintain dialogue between partners that would otherwise have difficult conversations. For example, it's the obvious goal to tackle global challenges. I think this has been always associated with science diplomacy. I think we have, however, as well take into consideration the security and foreign relation aspects of science diplomacy. And I speak from the point of view, if I may say so, a practitioner. I consider myself as a career diplomat with some academic background, but I've been 25 years in the diplomatic service, most of the time actually dealing with global issues, and quite a few years in the area of science diplomacy. And I have to say that I have observed that there has been growing, I would say, recognition that when talking about international collaboration in science and technology, we have to take into consideration as well some security and foreign policy issues. Let me just mention the very important subject of security of international collaboration itself. For example, when developing together sensitive technologies, we have to avoid any, I would say, risk that the results of the research of the common programs would be misused against for our values and principles, could be misused as dual technologies and so forth. This is a very important topic, and I think more and more governments, including the Czech government, are mindful of that. So what I would like to say, and echo what was said actually before the break, the science diplomacy should take more in a more, I would say, intensive way the security and foreign policy aspect. Doesn't obviously mean that we should cease our collaboration. It doesn't for sure mean that we should resign on issues like working together in developing technologies to mitigate climate change and so on and so forth. But it means that in some areas we should be more and more, I would say, careful. Having said that, coming back to the question raised by the moderator, I think science diplomacy will have, I would say, a new role regarding the post-war assistance to Ukraine, because in my opinion, it's very critical that for the future plan of recovery assistance to Ukraine, science and technology development is the integral part of these policies. Obviously, this was the Putin's intention to destroy the country, to damage as much as possible the cultural heritage. We know the stories about the looted museums and so forth. It was an intentional policy to destroy the research center, the universities, and so forth. So we will have to support Ukraine in rebuilding back the facilities, but I think at the same time it should be an opportunity to modernize the country, to the research system, and the technology development and Ukrainian researchers themselves I believe we will come back to that. Working together with us as Europeans, it will be a very important part, and we should not forget about it. There should be adequate resources, financial and institutional and personal, to really ensure that an assistance to Ukraine is based on utilization of best available technologies in order to rebuild the country. So I believe that the time is, unfortunately, the war is still going on. And unfortunately, nobody knows when the war is over. But I think it's high time for us to think how after the war we will be ready and able to really devise the policies that would help to develop Ukraine based on best available research, being in social scientists, being technologies, so that we support not only reconstruction of Ukraine, but as well the very system of research and innovation in Ukraine. So I don't want to speak for too long, so
thank you, Peter.
Kick-off.
And Pavel, for you, you cooperate very strongly with the Ukrainian side, but also you cooperate on the international level. Now it's model more supporting networking very quickly, or it's more with statement, declaration and agreements? What is the time for model of the science diplomacy for in this case?
To answer in short, I would say that so far the whole support was rather carried out in a kind of ad hoc mode, but we should go into the direction of a more structured schemes of support. But that's a general statement, but let's go to the practical level. So there are a few institutions in Poland whose mission is actually internationalization of higher education, and they are very active in supporting Ukraine. One of them is the institution that I represent. We are the operator of Erasmus Plus program, but we also operate many other programs, also the intergovernmental Polish-Ukrainian Youth Exchange, and many, many others. So let me share some thoughts with you about practical things. So one of the tools which is quite useful in supporting Ukrainians is Erasmus Plus program. Not all the people are aware that actually within Erasmus Plus, even if Ukraine is not a full member and does not have the budget to participate in projects and in the mobility, actually, according to the decisions of the European Commission, the decisions were taken a few months ago, actually very quickly in the response of what is happening. 25% of the budget of the universities which are in member states countries, 25% of these budgets can be used to support Ukrainian students. And actually, well, obviously, the respective universities need to have it in their contract with their respective national agencies, but this is a very simple technical aspect to solve if they don't have it yet. Obviously, those 25% diminish their budgets for sending their students abroad to Germany, to Spain, and to other countries of the program. But still, after the pandemic, not all the universities are using all their budgets to full extent. So there is a tool here, a very effective tool to support Ukrainian students. And I think that I'm starting with this example, not only because of the fact that I'm the head of Erasmus Plus in Poland, but I think it's a very good tool because mobilities within Erasmus Plus program for students, usually we associate them with going abroad for one semester. It's not like this anymore. Actually, those mobilities can be very short, for example, for 1 week, but they can be long, up to 2 years. There is huge flexibility as far as the time span is concerned, but there is also huge flexibility as far as the content of this mobility is concerned. These mobilities can be used to spend some time in the partner university just to continue the studies, but also to do little research as well. So it's actually up to the individual how he or she wants to use it, and obviously with if the offer of the university allows that. So this is a very interesting tool, because actually we should remember that, as I said in the beginning, all the activities on our part were kind of ad hoc activities. All individual peoples helped, universities helped, the ministry, you know, everyone, but without any kind of structured strategy. And at a certain stage, Ukrainian universities started to complain because actually they were losing their students. How can you rebuild your country if you lose your people? So Erasmus Plus is a good tool, because actually when you have those students in Poland, for example, or any other countries in Europe, and you make them Erasmus Plus students, it means that they can stay in a hosting country up to 2 years, continue their work, their study, also maybe little research, but at the same time they are still the students of their Ukrainian universities. So the link is still there. There is no breaking up in those links, and then we won't be somehow accused of brain drain. So that's an important thing. So that's one example. There is another institution in Poland which is called we are National Agency for Erasmus Plus, but there is another institution. This is state-owned institution. They are called National Agency for Academic Exchange. The difference between us and them is that they mostly fund research activities and international research mobility. So within their funds, they supported Polish University to create some so-called welcome points. So those welcome points are used to welcome students, in most cases from Ukraine, but not only, for those short-term mobilities like Erasmus+, but also they serve for the students who are willing to be regular students for full-time courses in Poland. So there is a kind of synergy here. We cooperate very closely. There is still another initiative. There is a third, I would say, key player in Poland as far as internationalization of higher education is concerned in Poland. This is the Foundation Perspektywy. They are, most of the initiatives are carried out together in cooperation with rectors' conferences, Polish universities' rectors' conferences. And their last initiative, obviously they organize different schemes like funding scholarships, supporting individual students or researchers, PhD students, postdoc students, and so on. But their last initiative, and actually they had a week ago they had a big launching conference in Lublin. Their initiative is to train Ukrainian women staying in Poland. Men are at war, so usually these are women. Sometimes these are the students, sometimes these are the women with children, you know, different life situations. So their project is to train 30,000 Ukrainian women to become IT specialists. Obviously, some of them will be trained at not at a very high level. Probably they will work in banks or offices or public organizations. But some of them probably will go to the top with their expertise, and they will be used by the government to create high level IT solutions. So the basic idea is that the country like Ukraine, being in a hostile environment, we can find some parallels here, like Taiwan, for example, or South Korea or Israel. So the country like this needs to go to high tech. So that would be one of the tools to become resilient. So we want to be part of it as Poland. Obviously, we've created a lot of links and relationships already on individual levels, institutional levels, university levels, everywhere. But with this huge mass, obviously, I agree that the questions about security are very important because you have a big mass, yes, here as the phenomenon. So it will be very difficult to somehow to monitor or to control it. But we in Poland, we have this kind of capacity and potential to help Ukraine. And we would like to do it with American money, obviously, because sooner or later American money will come. And we want to be part of it. If we use it effectively and properly, I don't know, time will show. But we are there with different possible tools and ideas and those relations and contacts which have been created, and they are really very strong. And this is a very special, also very special moment in the history between two nations, because those relations are really powerful and sincere. Yes.
Thank you, Paweł. And Professor Ho-Yang, from your perspective, more global perspective, in the moment of crisis, what kind of the science diplomacy is most useful for help people in danger?
All right. Thank you for the question. Before I answer this question, actually, I would like to share two pictures with you. So, in this summer, Taipei office organized a workshop with the U.S. Embassy in Prague. This is a workshop we call it the painting therapy. We invite the artists coming from Taiwan and coming from the United States to teach Ukrainian family how to do painting. And use painting, you can help yourself to release some pressure. So in this summer, we have this workshop, and on next day, we have the so-called exhibition in Rudolphin. So this is a very beautiful hall. You can find there's about 30 to 40 painting there to display it. So one of my favorite drawing is this one, please. Okay, this is a picture. If I'm correct, this should be come from a lady, 30 years old. She told us she is always dreaming going back to her house in Ukraine. But her house now is sinking into the ground because of the war. So she can only pray day and night with tears. So to me, this is a very touching story. And also, I want to use this story. Okay, thank you. I want to use story to tell people why Taiwan want to help. Actually, before the war, Taiwan don't have any kind of strong relationship or connection to Ukraine. But we want to help because I think the story is the answer. And let's go back to the question, how Taiwan can help or the science diplomacy can help. At the beginning of the war, we tried to transfer some students and scholars from Poland to Taiwan. Actually, right now, there are about 50 students and scholars study in Taiwan and do some research in Taiwan. But very soon we find that, yes, I agree with our panelists talking about, because if your people live in your country, it's very hard for rebuilding. So we try to donate some amount of budget to like a Czech government, to Poland government, And also our university donates some fund to Polish Academy of Sciences to help them to host the scholars there in Poland. Because the Ukrainian scholar tell us they don't want to stay away from her family because their family is still in Ukraine. So they cannot stay away. So they decide to stay in Poland. Even we provide the better environment for their study, for their research, they still decide to stay in Poland territory to stay close to their family. So we just donated the fund to Polish Academy of Sciences. So how can we help from Taiwan side, from our perspective? Actually, we start to bridge the cooperation between universities. So I help Kiev University to have some kind of memorandum understanding signed with Taiwan University, with Tsinghua University. So in next year, they can start to send exchanging students going to Taiwan. And we can host the living cost, we can provide the flight ticket like that way. And also, we start to trying to find somehow Academia Snika can help the scholars in Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. Maybe online, maybe some kind of virtual meeting, and also we can join some kind of research project. So just like I mentioned, okay, in the first panel, I asked a question about what's the difference between the traditional international diplomacy and the science diplomacy. Actually, I want to answer this question from myself, like this way. I believe international diplomacy is just like an umbrella. Inside, beneath the umbrella is empty, but you need some kind of cultural diplomacy, you need science diplomacy to support that one. So that means if your science diplomacy can grow up, can be stronger, then you can push up the umbrella a little bit higher, then create more space for two countries. So my job here is just like we try to enhance the cooperation between Taiwan and several Central Europe countries. And my job is also include the Ukraine help and also the science cooperation. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Professor. I have another question. Because Taiwan relies on the combination of development, policy and science. And sometimes now in Ukraine, it's very obvious that technology are the product of strategic importance. Often they are in weapon in economy. So my question is, what is the way to transform technology like a weapon in science diplomacy?
Okay, this is also a very hard question. To me, it's like this way. Some guys, international diplomacy is for the reality, but science diplomacy is for the future. Only two countries has the good relationship. We can develop a very good science cooperation. I want to mention one thing, like in Czech Republic, Dr. George lead a team going to Taiwan in this September, and the majority is focusing on the pandemic cooperation and also the semiconductor cooperation. Because the two countries, we have so many, we have so strong and so close relationship. So we start to develop many things in a science field. So I want to answer the question just like, it's very hard to separate the science or technology diplomacy to the international diplomacy. Only two countries will like to develop the good connections, then we can start to have the strong cooperation, even in the science and the technology field.
Oksana, I have another phenomenon, what is interesting for me. It started on pandemic period when scientists discuss with the fake news users the question about what is pandemia, it's true or not true. In the discussion initiated by scholars in social media. And it was this, now during the war in Ukraine, I have the same impression that the social media is also very important, how to say, tools. I couldn't find the correct word for this phenomenon. Do you think that this phenomenon will stay like the permanent in the science diplomacy, or it's something more, and how they can help to build the relationship between the sides of the conflicts?
Well, I guess one couldn't imagine the world without social media anymore, but one also realizes how it forms opinion and also policy decisions. And of course, as means of communication, this is a very important instrument, and specifically in the field where things are changing so much and information plays such a big role. What I've observed on sort of grassroots level, that there was also like a clash of instruments or habits of use. So, for example, Science for Ukraine, a very known grassroots initiative, they started basically as a Twitter campaign. And then they realized that actually, although they were getting a lot of support from foreign researchers who wanted to support Ukrainians, they had very few Ukrainians because they just don't apparently use Twitter so much, but they are all on Facebook and Telegram. So that was like they were learning, okay, we now need to change our communication strategy. And Telegram, for example, there were these groups created, Ukrainian scientists at war, where discussions were happening, where you had a minister and a researcher, and the news were shared about funding opportunities or support programs. So in that respect, this is, of course, extremely important tool. On the other hand, what you touched upon is the whole miscommunication or disinformation campaign and trolls, and how this affects public opinion, and how much disinformation comes through. And I'm situated, live in Germany, and for a very long time, if you ask an ordinary citizen what Ukraine would be associated with, and they would say dry car, so Krise, Krieg, Korruption. And this is, it's not to say that at the time, like, there was no corruption. Of course, it's an issue, but it's not the only thing that Ukraine has. And of course, there's a lot of what has to be done for improving the image, but the use of social media can sometimes exaggerate, and misinformation, denials of Bucha massacres, or 90 years ago, Holodomor, again, complete denials of all of that. And it's not just from some people you never met. There were these campaigns with researchers where Ukrainian researchers were writing letters to the Russian research collaborators with whom they published together, and they would get back messages like, first, it doesn't happen, it can't be that Russia bombs Ukrainian cities, and second, if it happens, you deserve it. And that was like 90% of answers. So one sees what the information can make to people who are educated, who are, so what can we say about general public who often has much less knowledge? It's a dangerous tool, but I can't imagine the world now living without it, so we need to learn to deal with it.
Thank you, Oksana. Pavel, as a researcher, you're analyzing the digitalization process of science and higher education. About the positive side of digitalization, we can talk a lot, but what is the risk for the Ukrainian institution? What is your view?
So actually the risks has already been identified. So security. So on the one side, not only Ukraine, but well, we are, after the pandemic, we are all in a process of digital transformation. And apart from this, if we put this discussion on a more general level, AI is looming somewhere on the horizon. So this is the process which is in front of all of us. But for Ukraine, probably that is extremely important. because that will allow them to make the whole process more flexible. As you know, sometimes it's much easier for them to work online. I will tell you because sometimes we don't understand the real needs of Ukrainian higher education institutions. So if you ask them what is the most important thing, they will tell you just to get some funding to make the bunkers. Now the law, Ukrainian law, says that if you'd like to continue as the educational institution and you'd like to have pupils, students in your school or university, you need to have a bunker. That's their real need. So, and the cost of such a bunker is around 5,000 euros. It's nothing, for example, for, I don't know, most of the Polish universities, which could send this money to their Ukrainian counterparts so that they could have those bunkers. So obviously, high technology, digital transformation is one thing that will allow them to function more flexibly, but they also have very, basic needs. So yes, that would be my my general answer. But if you take into account all the universities from the whole Europe, helping Ukrainians to have those bunkers would be peanuts. Yeah?
Peter, you want to add something? I know.
Well, if I may pick up on some points that were made already on Pavel's point on assisting the young researchers, students from Ukraine in our countries, I think it has been really a lot of efforts in many regards to really help the refugees from Ukraine, including in our country. As early as in March, our ministries get together and they developed programs and scholarships to assist the researchers on our territory. And many universities, the Academy of Science put forward their own initiative. And I think all of this should be welcomed. It really alleviates the situation for many people, but we should not forget that we are talking about refugees, that there are researchers that actually stayed in Ukraine and are going to stay in Ukraine. And I think this is the issue, how we can reach out to those people who actually find in very grave situation, their families are endangered, and they actually are not in a position to conduct their research. I think we have to really start thinking about this issue. Just would like to inform that the Czech government recently adopted a provision in a funding program conducted by the technology agency that should fund and support collaboration between Czech and Ukrainian institutions, but the challenge remains how we can organize that, how really we can facilitate such a collaboration knowing the situation in Ukraine. So I think this is the issue, how to support those people who find themselves in dire situation in Ukraine and help them to engage with us in a way that they would be able to join later on the research consortia supported by European Union, because we can bring the Ukrainians research closer to the European priorities, and I think it's crucial. Ukraine, there is no doubt that Ukraine has a lot of talented people. The Ukraine ingenuity, I think, has proved itself even in this horrible crisis, and many people refer to Soviet era technologies as Russian technologies, but many of them were actually developed in Ukraine. So I think the talent is there, but we don't still have the clear-cut strategy how to reach out. And at the same time, I think it was as well mentioned already when working together with Ukraine counterparts supporting them, I think we should think about all the spectrum of research. I mentioned already the cultural heritage. We could obviously support Ukraine in developing via digital technologies, for example, the restoration and recovery of the treasures lost or damaged, stemming up to the development of technologies. I already referred to the quality of, I would say, technology skills in Ukraine, and the technologies will be necessary for rebuilding the country. And the technologies they develop together, I believe, on priority areas as well for European research. And last but not least, to be very frank, I think Ukraine would need our assistance in reforming their research system after the war. Because I think this is as well the issue, the management of the system, the effectiveness of the system, the support, especially in this in the future, it will be very difficult to fund adequate resources in this room. And I believe online there are many people who actually were, and personalities who are very instrumental in reforming the system in this country. So possibly we can share some experience how we can support Ukraine in ameliorating and making more effective in the future the research system in Ukraine, and being more attentive and able to work with the European Union, because in the European context, because I think this is the ultimate goal. It seems to be far away at the moment, but I think we should not lose track of that we are building the future.
Sana, I know that you...
Yes, thank you. I do think this is very important, the keyword strategy and collaboration. I mean, word support and in this situation is of course very appropriate, but I think seeing the mutual benefit, seeing the opportunity in, although the situation is caused by this horrible war and brutality of it, but as a matter of fact, the thousands of Ukrainian researchers who are now hosted by Western universities, just through the physical fact of being there and working there for short term, for 3-6 months, they start to develop joint, well, first they collaborative activities, applying for grants, maybe developing joint educational programs. The researchers who stayed in Ukraine, and that is also a comment about students. So if students are here on mobility, and also PhD students, according to the reformed PhD education in Ukraine, up to 2 years, half of their PhD study, they can be on academic mobility. They don't have to be enrolled here in the program formally. They can be still formal students in Ukraine and doing academic mobility. And this is what extremely needed. It's the next generation of scientists who right now maybe don't have access to the infrastructure to carry out their research. But by being still affiliated with Ukrainian organization, this also justifies why the teachers who are staying in Ukraine are paid, because as soon as they are losing numbers of students, then the pay cut comes to the university staff. So by us here helping, as Pablo was mentioning, we are undermining the institutions in Ukraine. And that's, of course, what we don't want. So this longer term strategy and longer term also scientific projects, which recently Polish government just announced the 3-year research collaboration project, the Czech, again, it gives this perspective, because when you talk to Ukrainian scientists directly, it's not, I mean, of course, it's horrible not to have light and water, but they all talk about the future, and us believing that there is future for Ukraine is extremely important, and planning for it. So I think it was, of course, logical in the very first months to have the emergency help for people who were displaced. And I personally don't like word refugees simply because they are not refused by their country, but they had to be forcefully displaced, or they are displaced because they had to flee the war. But with the majority staying in Ukraine, also female scientists, the majority of them stay in Ukraine, the majority who want to go back to Ukraine, using this interaction time also to develop a smart specialization strategy for Ukraine, which has not happened in the past because Ukraine didn't have a candidacy status, which it now has, and it can learn from smart strategy initiatives developed before by other countries, and think that maybe we don't have to rebuild everything that was destroyed, because, as you correctly say, it's also a chance to build a new structures, and specifically on high-tech IT. I had seen reports that IT industry, although some of the companies had to be relocated and they lost some staff, they actually increased their turnover in the time of war. So it is proving itself extremely resilient. And I remember when research managers from Ukraine contacted us in Germany asking to help maybe organize some webinars on knowledge transfer on crisis management. What it ended up being, basically, I think the German science managers were learning about crisis management of Ukrainian institutions, because actually that they managed to run the national exam for students, that they managed to graduate these students, that in the already ongoing war situation with some institutions physically destroyed, with such a huge number being displaced, that you have Mariupol University, which exists as a virtual reality with students dispersed and teachers dispersed, but it operates. So we can see, I think, that focus from individuals moving towards institutions, moving towards more structural support, more longer-term support, coordinating it and finding synergies, because, of course, having huge number of initiatives is great, but then at some point, some coordination, some synergy is needed, because we don't want just to waste resources. So I think this is important. And very specifically, in addition to bunkers, Starlinks. So in the bunker, they need internet, and then they function. And Starlinks are saving not only Ukrainian military, but also institutions. And the same goes in terms of such a small thing as inviting researchers who are in Ukraine for a talk and paying them honorarium. It's something that is technically very easily done. Many organizations, universities started to do it, and through that they are supporting people there on the ground. So in my view, it's extremely important that one uses different initiatives and activities, but tries to find the ways of coordinating this effort, and also learning from countries like from Poland or here Czech Republic, because it's much closer and much more was happening.
But I remember a time when it was during the non-democratic election on Belarus with the Lukashenko. We have also the silent. We should thinking that we also have the silent heroes on Belarus who support the Ukrainian researcher, and we should also thinking about how we can help them in this dramatic situation, not only in danger like Ukrainian researcher, but also in Belarus, in the eastern region. So my last question is also very open. Where is the moment when we should start it about lifting sanction? How to build the dialogue with our researcher institution from the Russian side. Maybe Professor Huan, because it's the global.
Okay. I think I'm the only one coming from the country outside of Europe. So to me, I think the conversation, the communication between two countries is always welcome. And also, I think this is the basis to enhance the mutual understanding. Only understanding of both, then we can have some kind of, we can avoid something in the coming future. But talking about sanctions lifting, to Taiwan, or from our perspective, is still kind of should be very careful. Several weeks ago, I joined an event in Bratislava with the Deputy Minister Habikova, talking about the democratic country and the autocratic country. This kind of difference, it's in the autocratic countries, it's very hard to predict what happens in the coming future or what kind of purpose of the technology can be used. So for the sanction of high technology, especially for high technology, as to the country like Russia, I believe it should be very careful, and maybe every country need to have the roadmap or understand what kind of core technology need to be preserved inside and not to release. So to me, I still believe some kind of sanctions to some special country is required, is also need. Thank you.
Paweł,
No,
yes,
because
please.
I think that Oksana has already answered the question in the previous set of questions. Because when you referred to those answers from Russian researchers, yes, that they don't believe that the bombing is happening in Ukraine. It's like denying Holocaust and other things. We know it from the history. And if bombing did happen, you deserved it. So if that is the case, who do you want to cooperate with?
But from the professional diplomat.
Well, I would say that the sanctions related to research are part and parcel of overall package of sanctions and should be treated like that. And having said that, I think lifting the sanction will very much depend on, I would say, the final settlement of the war, the aggression of Russians. And I think just one sentence that I can add would read nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So I would consider the sanctions part of the overall policy.
Yes.
And I maybe just say, I mean, the war was started by Russia, and any minute they can stop it. And as soon as they leave Ukraine, the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, one can start talking about reparations, about prosecuting for war crimes. And after that, one can also consider if sanctions are still justified. Until all that happened, one can't talk, I mean, you can't be a vegetarian having a dinner with a cannibal. If they are continuing bombing and declaring this is official strategy that people have to freeze and have to suffer, I don't see any possibility of talking with war criminals, and it's on record from the highest level. So I think this is has to be within the international law, and Ukraine never said anything which is outside of international law. All Ukraine wants to live within its borders and self-determine what they want to do.
Yes, thank you. It's obvious, but as we discussed today topic about the diplomacy and science diplomacy, and sometimes we have the many examples from the history, even from the history with our countries, that this sub-diplomacy started to break the system. So thank you very much for a very interesting panel. Thank you, my disputants. And I think that Mr. Professor Michael Matlosz, the floor is yours now. Question from the audience. Sorry. Welcome.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Vladimir Mayer. I am physical chemist by education and by most of my career. I was working mainly outside Czechoslovakia and Czech Republic. First of all, in France, I was staffer at the French National Center for Scientific Research. And I was sent for 5 years to Moscow to head the regional office of CNRS for Russia and new independent states, including Ukraine. So it was between 2006 and 2011. So now it sounds as a fairy tale when I tell you that I was developing also triangular collaboration between France, Ukraine, and Russia. The time changed. Everything what we did was completely destroyed. And now getting to this question of lifting sanctions, or if scientific diplomacy can have some positive role in redeveloping relations. So having this 5-year experience from Russia and seeing what has happened in the meantime, I think that is absolutely excluded to restart some kind of collaboration at institutional level, not only during the war, of course, not at the time when the war is finished, but before the change of the regime in Russia. So this is not certainly the case for a short term. So it is absolutely excluded, in my opinion. On the other hand, individual relations between scientists, they will remain, they will persist. People may even publish together, they have contacts, and there is a substantial part of the Russian scientific community who is against the war. This is not on this institutional level, so it is not so visible, but it is grassroots. And it should be possible. These people who won't leave the country and who speak openly against the regime and who are in danger because of their position as private persons or by the type of the research that they do, to allow them to work in the scientific institutions in universities abroad. I think that it would be also extremely helpful if we don't want to look to Russians as a nation who has absolute collective, that is guilty as collective country. So the difference should be made between institutional cooperation and collaboration on this individual level. And I think on this institutional level, the situation in the Academy of Sciences of Russia is now today worse than in the Brezhnev times. When the regime was making pressure to Academy of Sciences to expel Zakharov, the academicians resisted and didn't do it. This is impossible to think such a situation today. Thank you.
It is also welcome, Madam Director.
Yes, thank you so much. Excuse me to step in. I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but I think there is something I would like to clarify as far as the sanctions are concerned, as being one of the person who worked on that. The sanctions are against the Russian public organizations, not against Russian scientists. We have adopted immediately the sanctions which would cover the one Russian public organization, the Moscow Institute for Physics and Technology, which was listed in the first package of sanction, and the ongoing research project with this institute was blocked. And then we needed to find a way to block the participation of the other Russian public institutes to the Horizon 2020 program. Hence, we have put a provision in the fifth package of sanction, which allows to block the participation of all public institutes, Russian public institutes, to the EU, all EU programs and member states programs. But again, those sanctions are targeted to the public institutes, to the Russian public institutes, and the cooperation with the Russian scientists continues apart from the fact if some of those scientists are specifically listed as individual persons within the sanction regime. I think it was important to clarify that, and this of course goes along with all the efforts and the measures, and our colleague from Ukraine mentioned that, and the others, that the EU has put in place to support the Ukrainian scientists, the Ukrainian research system, including facilitate, speaking about association, the Ukrainian association to the Horizon Europe program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Russo, for clarifying that what we are talking about. We are talking about sanctions against institutions and while engaging researchers. At the same time, I would like to come back to the point I raised at the beginning. I think this is the security of the international research. We should be mindful of that issue. I think especially in some sensitive areas like advanced digital technologies, quantum computing, and so forth, I think the European researchers should be much more attentive to the possibility of the international collaboration be endangered by some risk of not only intellectual property abuse, but about issues like development of some sensitive technologies. It doesn't obviously apply only to Russia, but to other countries that we don't share, I would say, the same values and principles. So I think it's very important. And again, I would refer back to Director Russo and the whole EU approach as science diplomacy as a global instrument of global diplomacy. I think takes into the consideration that the trusted research, the research that is safeguarded from any potential abuse, is a very important topic.
So again, I will mention the global approach to research and innovation and also the Horizon Europe program. For the first time in Horizon Europe, we have a provision which is Article 22.5, which allows, against the general opening of the program, to close some specific actions for security-related reasons and for protecting the EU's strategic autonomy. This is also one of the key pillars of the global approach, which says the EU wants to be as open as possible, but as close as necessary when it's necessary. Hence, in the first bunch of work program for 2021-22, we closed around 50 actions, but not only to Russia, to a group of countries, leaving it open only to some of the associated countries and our core like-minded partners. And we have done this exercise also with this new work program, which has been adopted last week, in which we also made use of another instrument, which is Article 22.6 of the Horizon Europe regulation, which allows also to exclude a specific country from a set of activities, and hence we have blocked the possibility for Chinese research entities to participate to the innovation-related activities. So I will be not longer on that, but this is exactly the global approach in motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I also would like to put it in a broader context of a question of academic freedom, because if we say that the values that we observe, that there are certain conditions to actually being able to carry out research have to be met by our partners. This is not a question of political sanctions. This is also a question of our own scientific integrity, who we cooperate with. Is this possible in certain countries, even if it's an individual researcher, in the conditions of the institute where they, for example, have to report to FSB any foreigner because this is now internal rules? and how far you as such a foreign collaborator prepared to be on the books of FSB being checked and heard through simply because that's are their national rules. So I think this is a much broader issue. And if we adhere to our own principles of academic freedom and scientific integrity, then basically sanctions comes on top as a political instrument, and maybe just as a statement in terms of science diplomacy, also specifically in times of crisis. I do believe that it could be a very useful instrument, and it should be used whenever possible to build bridges or maintain dialogue. On the other hand, one should be very much aware that science should not be instrumentalized for political reasons, and some of the Western democratic naivety in terms of we are just talking about science, how that could be misused by some autocratic regimes. And here I just give a brief example. A few years ago, still before the very active phase of the war, it was considered acceptable by some leadership of very important scientific organizations to, in person, to go to Moscow for some events. And that was considered as a science diplomacy because we want to keep dialogue and talking. The way it was interpreted by the other side, it was like, great, it's okay to annex Crimea, it's okay to annex part of Georgia, it's okay to instigate the war in the east of Ukraine. But look, heads of the big scientific organizations are coming personally to us. Business as usual. This is how it is perceived. And in that respect, this is not science diplomacy. So in my plaidoyer is not to be over naive with good intentions, that one has to be careful with own interests and also own integrity.
Thank you. Thank you. The last one, maybe, please.
Thank you very much, Jiří Marek again, Masaryk University. Thank you very much for this kind of emotional approach, and thank you very much, really deeply in that. One thing what struck me, and my knowledge in science diplomacy is not so deep, so maybe it's it will be out. It is not the idea, but for me, one of the great examples of science diplomacy in research is Sesame, in the Middle East, and so maybe. Is it the time for start to thinking something like that in Ukraine, to in the post-war, and we didn't know when, And maybe second thing is because it's not going to be only about researchers, but also about public administration. So what kind of resonates, it's like Erasmus for public officers, to going to meet in another countries. So maybe this is another thing that I would like to know your opinion. Thank you very much.
If I just comment, I do believe that generally for the concept of the future rebuilding, having a big scientific infrastructure in a country is an extremely important investment, which then generates a whole ecosystem and cluster of innovation and excellence. So envisaging something like that in Ukraine, which would stimulate also stronger collaboration with Czech Republic, with Poland, with Hungary, when situation there in terms of academic freedom is improved. But the countries who basically are prepared to work on the same principles would be important. Of course, this is a longer term commitment, and one has to be aware that these things also need money longer term. It's not just the initial investment, and that is the danger. But they do stimulate a lot of capacity building, and in my view, this should be part of the package on top of the project funding for collaboration and part. So, and I do agree also in terms of the support for professionals in science, not only for researchers themselves. And I feel this is a target group that during all these packages of support that I've seen so far was almost missing. And one of the elements of it is also like further education or long-time learning. So even if some researchers or science managers in Ukraine might not have the possibility right now to carry out research, they could use time for some distant learning courses to improve English, to learn project management, to learn how to apply for European funding and things like that, which is essential and extremely important, and was not like offered on a high scale before. So there are ways of also supporting not only researchers themselves, but also research managers, but also not only through pure research activities.
Actually, those Erasmus offices already exist in Ukraine and also other countries. It's not in the regular sense, like in member states, that there is a national agency. But we in Poland, we as the Polish National Agency for Erasmus+, we run in the name of, and on behalf of the European Commission, we've been running a special program which is called SALTO for Eastern Partnership countries. We've been running this program since 2014, and within this program, actually, we've established a lot of offices promoting different European programs. So those offices are in Ukraine, in Armenia, in Georgia, in Azerbaijan. So obviously, some of them stopped the operation in Ukraine because of the war, especially in those northern and eastern parts. Actually, the first one was bombed during the first days of the war, but some of them are there. So, and we have those links. This is our responsibility to maintain those contacts. So actually, this kind of structure already exists. It's for information. It's not so much for giving funds, but it's for information. Yeah.
Peter?
Very briefly, to pick up on the point made by Oksana, I think it boils down to the question of the best and most effective support at the critical situation and for the future. I think, yesterday it was in principle agreed quite a lot of money in Brussels for the support to Ukraine, and I would say the demand would be enormous, obviously. And there are some very emergency money needed in order to keep the researchers getting to survive, actually. But we should not lose from our side the perspective. It would be then decisive how the transformation and reconstruction of the country would be successful. So I think again it's about some immediate needs to be satisfied, but at the same time, as Oksana has underlined several times, we should be starting thinking in a strategic way how to really rebuild the country, and especially in terms of research, because I think the research component would be really critical for the overall success of rebuilding of the country. If we lose the opportunity, the talent in Ukraine, the opportunities to collaborate, I think the recovery would be very slow, would not be in the end successful. So I think this is really something very important. People speak about science and technology is very important, but I think in Ukraine would be really a test case, how we can utilize science for rebuilding the nation.
One more time, thank you for my very distinguished panelist, for the active audience, and I think that not is the time for Professor Michael Matlosz, our president of Euroscience, my chief. Welcome, the floor is yours.
I wanted to show that I knew where the green button was. Apparently it takes an entire morning to develop that skill. Okay, thank you very much to everyone. I'd like to first thank the Senate of the Parliament of the Czech Republic, Yuri, my friend, for helping us to put this together. I'd like to thank Martin Mestrik and Jana Hazarova from the organizing side. Also on our side, Mary Sukhanova and Leah from the Euroscience. I think it's been a wonderful opportunity for us to get together here at this time in an emblematic place like Prague. We are now moving slowly, and I think many of you realize that the Euroscience Open Forum in the European City of Science now moving to Katowice in Poland as the first of, we hope, a series of Central and Eastern European cities involved in Euroscience activities is really a big thing for us. Obviously, the recent events in Ukraine are giving a special accent in this particular conference to current issues about how to react. I just wanted to remind the audience here of the declaration that we put out as Euroscience, condemning the brutal aggression and the flagrant violation of international law and human rights following the attacks from the Russians in February last, about 10 months ago. We reacted immediately. We were among the first organizations to condemn the action, and I think we do not put out very many of these statements. I think if you look at our website, we don't do this very often, and we felt it was necessary to do it immediately in that particular case. What I'm bringing home as messages from this meeting and thinking about our role as Euroscience, and maybe coming back to what Matthias said this morning in introduction, is we're an organization that tries to represent the views of individual science professionals. So these are people working in the scientific area as researchers, teachers, in some cases science journalists, communicators, policymakers, and others. People with a scientific background who are working in companies or businesses or academic institutions or universities. And these people, because of their scientific background and because of their scientific activity, they have a particular responsibility in society. And we are organized as Euroscience to work on that aspect of it. What is the role of these scientists as responsible professionals? Individually, independently of their institutional affiliation or their employer. And so, as I was thinking about my closing remarks, I was thinking also about that distinction, and it came up. I was a little bit worried because it didn't come up very often until Oksana started mentioning that there was a whole question about ethics and individual responsibility in this affair. And I think that the question of academic freedom, the question of scientific integrity, the question of responsibility as an individual working in contexts that may be difficult are complementary to the institutional aspects. And the institutional aspects, most of our discussions today have been on the institutional aspects. But of course, this regards, of course, the infrastructures, this regards the financing, and this regards putting in place structures and operations that allow movement from one place to another. I mentioned during the lunch break to Maria Cristina and others that I was impressed by Maria Cristina's mention of the water, and I started thinking about water, and then I started thinking about the other things that we were talking about during the morning session. And I started thinking about talent pools of talent. In particular, the remark that was made about the difficulties in the following Brexit with the UK, and the fact that they're having a little bit of trouble with movement and mobility of scientific talent. I think one of the things that's extremely important when we think about individuals is that individuals working in the scientific community are a little bit different from other people. They have special skills. And those special skills are developed first as students, when we work with them as students, and we want the most talented people to become interested in these things and to get involved. We also are interested in developing collaborations when they are appropriate. And then we get into this question of diplomacy and foreign affairs. And I was sensitive to the fact that most of the speakers on the different panels talked about the fact that maybe we shouldn't define science diplomacy too well. Maybe we should keep it a little bit fuzzy so that we can maintain the necessary synergies between foreign policy and science diplomacy. Science diplomacy as some way that we institutionally put up ways for the talent pools to flow like water through canals or channels in one direction or another, depending on whether we open the valve or close the valve, or whether we allow something to happen, or whether we finance it or whether we don't. And so on the institutional level, we're looking at how these different movements of mobility can be adjusted, articulated, stopped when necessary, and then restarted when the situation becomes appropriate. I think that this is part of the foreign affairs aspect to it. And then on the other side, on the side of the individuals that are not the institutions, but they're the individual people, they have to think about their own engagement. They have to think about their responsibility. They have to think about the ethical component of what they're doing and how they interact in their professional life with their role in society. And practically everything that we've been doing over the last couple of years in neuroscience is thinking about this. What does it mean to be a responsible professional? Does it mean to be completely ignorant of anything that's happening in the world? Whether it be the consequences of the climate change, whether it be the consequences in reduction in biodiversity, whether it be issues regarding human rights, whether it be issues concerning international relations. Should we as scientists say, look, that's not our business. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to think about it. Or should we find a way still by maintaining our academic independence and our academic freedom when we're in the academic sector, and maintaining the quality and expertise when we're in the industrial sector, working with companies, that we still maintain some consciousness of the fact that we are not isolated from the rest of society. And I think if there's one message that comes through this is this fact that we are part of society. We are not outside of society. I'm looking at Yuri because, you know, as a former president of the National Academy of Sciences here in the Czech Republic, and myself as a member of the Academy of Technologies in France, you know, we are in the society. We're actually citizens, it turns out, and we have to think about that. So I think that here, this science diplomacy thing brings up perhaps more questions than it answers. But as our role, we feel also at Euroscience that we bring these questions to the fore, and we don't want to sweep them under the rug. We want to bring these out as something that has to be addressed, not necessarily because it's easy, but in particular because it's difficult. And I think that the younger generation, I had just an anecdote, I had an interesting discussion last Saturday with a young person. Turns out the son of a friend of my wife. And she said, you know, can you talk to this guy? He said he wants to talk to you. He's thinking about doing a doctoral thesis, but he's hesitating. And I said, oh, it's interesting. I wonder why he wants to talk to me. So we got on a Zoom call. And he said, you know, I'm not sure whether I have the right to do a doctoral thesis. You know, I mean, there are really urgent things happening. There's climate change out there. There's stuff, you know, I'm a smart guy. Maybe I should be doing things more useful. So I spent an hour with him trying to convince him that there actually was some societal value in scientific research. I don't know if I was successful, we'll see. I could sense immediately that this was a very talented person, but a talented person who was taking very seriously his societal responsibility. And I think the new generation coming through is a little bit different from maybe our generation. They're more concerned about these issues. And I think that this conference today brings out some of these points. And I think that we should take that home as maybe a take-home message. I'm looking at our Secretary General. We have to figure out a way to turn this into something concrete. But I think that thinking about how do individual scientists interact in this science diplomacy business as responsible individuals is clearly along the lines of our mission. And I hope that we will be able to continue this discussion So once again, I'd like to thank all the organizers. I'd like to thank all of the speakers. I'd like to thank also the people here in Prague, but also those people online that I don't see for participating in this event. Such an interactive event, so dynamic, with so many questions and answers coming from the panels and the audience, I think is an indication that the topic that we're talking about here really requires debate and discussion. So thank you once again to everyone, and good luck to all of you getting back home or getting off of your video conference communication. So thank you very much to everyone.
Mr. 1 minute more.
I apologize, just a few very last words. Thanks, Mike, for a perfect summing up of the main outputs of this conference. I'd like also to thank our two chairmen, Anna and Matthias, for excellent chairing the panels. Of course, thanks to all panelists from the morning and this one for very interesting contributions, and really, as Mike already mentioned, very vivid discussion, many questions, many interesting ideas. So that thanks for visiting this conference, thanks for online visiting this conference, and I wish you as peaceful rest of this year as possible, keeping fingers crossed for our Ukrainian friends who are in a very difficult situation, unlike all of us here. And I hope to meet at least some of you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita.